listen to that voice inside me. I must be stupid, must be crazy, must be out of my mind to say the kind of things I said last night. Mirror, mirror hanging on the wall, you don't have to tell me who's the biggest fool of all. Mirror, mirror, I wish you could lie to me and bring my baby back, bring my baby back to me. Show me what I wanna see. To me. Show me what I wanna see. Why did I let you walk away when all I had to do was say I'm sorry? I let my pride get in the way, and in the heat of the moment, I was to blame. I must be stupid, must be crazy, must be out of my mind. Now in the cold light of the day, I realize. Mirror, mirror hanging on the wall, you don't have to tell me who's the biggest fool of all. Mirror, mirror, I wish you could lie to me and bring my baby back, bring my baby back to me. If only wishes could be dreams and all my dreams could come true, there would be two of us standing here in front of you. If you could show me that someone that I used to be, bring back my baby, my baby and me. Mirror, mirror hanging on the wall, you don't have to tell me who's the biggest fool of all. Mirror, mirror, I wish you could lie to me and bring my baby back, bring my baby back. Mirror, mirror hanging on the wall, you don't have to tell me who's the biggest fool of all. Mirror, mirror, I wish you could lie to me and bring my baby back, bring my baby back to me. Show me what I wanna see. Mirror, mirror, lie to me. Show me what I wanna see. Mirror, mirror, lie to me. Do you love the rain? Does it make you dance when you jump with your friends at a party? What's your favorite song? Does it make you smile? Do you think of me? When you close your eyes, tell me, what are you dreaming? Everything I wanna know it all. I'd spend 10,000 hours and 10,000 more. Oh, if that's what it takes to learn that sweetheart of yours. And I might never get there, but I'm gonna try. If it's 10,000 hours or the rest of my life, I'm gonna love you. Do you miss the road that you grew up on? Did you get your middle name from your grandma? When you think about you forever now, do you think of me? When you close your eyes, tell me, what are you dreaming? Everything I wanna know it all. I'd spend 10,000 hours and 10,000 more. Oh, if that's what it takes to learn that sweetheart of yours. And I might never get there, but I'm gonna try. If it's 10,000 hours or the rest of my life, I'm gonna love you. I'm gonna love you. Oh, want the good and the bad, everything in between. Oh, that you're my curiosity. Oh yeah, I'd spend 10,000 hours and 10,000 more. Oh, if that's what it takes to learn that sweetheart of yours. And I might never get there, but I'm gonna try. If it's 10,000 hours or the rest of my life, I'm gonna love you. I'm gonna love you. Yeah. And I'm gonna love you. I'm gonna love you. Such a beautiful day. Why are you so blue? Hey, it's been too long that you shut your heart out. Well, I know it's true. Sometimes love can hurt, so give it some time. One day you'll be fine. It's such a beautiful day. Why you're still frowning? Hey, it's been too long to contemplate on how to deal with your broken heart all over again, till you can feel the love. Oh, when the sun comes after rain, you will live again, feeling love again. Love sometimes goes unseen. What you see on the screen and always what it seems. Such a beautiful day, let's celebrate. Hey, it's been so long since the last time you let the birds sing and fly around you to make you believe that you can also fly. 'Cause when the sun comes after rain, you will live again, feeling love again. Love sometimes goes unseen. What you see on the screen and always what it seems. 'Cause Standing in your arms, crying.
When you hear this word, what crosses your mind for the first time? Valuation, balance sheet, land, building? All the answers mentioned are not wrong, because valuation aims to find out the value of these things. But do you know the history of DGSAM appraisal in the first place, and why is an appraiser needed? Appraisal in the government DGSAM was established de facto on behalf of Directorate of Valuation in 2006. Appraisal is needed to assist the auction, mortgage, buy and sell assets, also identify the potential and underlying value of an asset. In addition, appraisal is useful for the process of compiling the central government's balance sheet. Since the establishment of the central government financial report and its balance sheet, in order to construct a transparent and accountable government and also to maintain public trust in the implementation of good governance, the government has urged to evaluate the state property assets to be carried out in 2007. Since then, improvement of institutional financial report was getting better. From there, Directorate of Valuation continues to carry out valuation in accordance with applicable regulations. For information, the objects that are evaluated are varied. In 2021 recently, Directorate of Valuation has carried out an appraisal of more than 200 properties in Karawang, Jakarta. Valuation of nickel mineral natural resources, marine resources in the Mamuju area, and the other assets such as valuation of HM Sampurna stock business, Astragrafia shares, cultural heritage assessment, PTP entry, and many more. Talking about the leader of Directorate of Valuation, as years passed by, the leadership of Directorate of Valuation was filled by different great leaders. Each leader certainly has a distinctive leadership style. Up until 2022, Directorate of Valuation has been led by 6 outstanding leaders. Starting from Mr. Iwan Hindawandadi at the beginning of the establishment of Directorate of Valuation in 2006, followed by Mr. Suyatno Harun in 2009, then Mr. I.B. Aditya Jayantara in 2011, Mr. Mirizal Nur in 2014, and continued by Mr. Kurniawan Nizar in 2019. Apart from the change in the leadership of Director of Valuation, this does not rule out the sole aim, which is advancing the Directorate of Valuation and actively participating for supporting the achievement of DGSAM's vision of becoming a professional and distinguished state asset manager. Currently, the leadership has been grasped by a new leader, namely Mr. Ari Haryono, who is ready to dedicate himself to carry on the unwavering spirit of the previous valuation directors for a better Directorate of Valuation. As we have known the leaders of the Directorate of Valuation, let's look further into the structure of Directorate of Valuation. After the reorganization in the financial environment in 2021 regarding the organization and work procedures of the Ministry of Finance, the Directorate has changed the organizational structure as well. As previously explained, Sub-Directorate of Valuation is led by Mr. Arik Haryono. Since April 13, 2022, officially, he is ready to lead the directorate, and under his lead, there are 3 sub-directorates and functional groups, where each sub-directorate is in charge of related sections. The first sub-directorate is Standardization of Property and Natural Resources Valuation, which is led by Mr. Mardanus Rudianto. This subdirectorate has the task of carrying out the preparation of policy formulation and technical standardization, analysis, and evaluation of policies in the field of property and natural resource valuation. The subdirectorate oversees 3 sections, namely, the first standardization section of property and natural resources, led by Mr. Wirto, and the second section is led by Mr. Dulatif, and the third section is led by Mr. Bungsu Teguh Karnadi. The second subdirectorate is Business Valuation Standardization, which is led by Mr. Noviantoro Agus Setiawan. This subdirectorate has the task of carrying out policy formulation and technical standardization, analysis, and evaluation of policies in the field of business valuation. The subdirectorate is in charge of 3 sections, namely the first standardization of business appraisal section, which is led by Mr. Sutarmin, and the second section led by Mr. Rofik Hamdani Yusuf, and the third section is led by Mr. Darmawan Dwi Atmoko. The third subdirectorate is Development Quality Management and Assessment Analysis, which is led by Mrs. Indriyasari Sundoro. This subdirectorate has the task of carrying out development, governance, quality management, analysis, management, monitoring, and evaluation in the field of valuation. The subdirectorate oversees 2 sections and 1 other subsection. They are Quality Assessment Development and Management section led by Mr. Umardani Yusuf Wayudi and Assessment Analysis section led by Mrs. Yunita Irawati. In addition, there is an Administration subsection which is led by Mr. Yuda Novrian Hidayat. Other than the subdirectorate, there are also functional groups consisting of JFPP. Ever wonder how an appraiser makes a decision in identifying a value of property? In reality, one approach to value that is generally used among appraisers is the sales comparison approach. The sales comparison approach is a process of indicating the value of subject property by comparing similar properties through their selling price. The selling price itself doesn't limit only to the selling price of the sold similar property, but it can include those of listed for sale or under contract. It then examines the similarities and differences elements of comparison that will be discussed in the further explanation. Before jumping into the core of the sales comparison approach, as a basis, there are principles of appraisals that are sticking to this particular approach, which are the supply and demand, substitution, balance, and externalities. Furthermore, the essential analysis that contributes to the sales comparison approach are the market analysis and highest and best use analysis, which can help appraisers in analyzing the competitive supply and demand factors that influence value in the market. So here are steps to apply in the sales comparison approach. First, research information of similar subject property. It is likely that 3-year sales history will be much appreciated. Second, verify the obtained transactional information. Verifying data will help eliminate the erroneous data that can have an injurious effect on adjustment amounts and ultimately the value indication. Third, select the most relevant units of comparison and conduct the comparative analysis. As a general basis, the unit of comparison used varies. It depends on the property type. The following are the common units of comparison used by appraisers. Next, adjust the price by examining the comparable units. We can use quantitative and qualitative techniques. Examples of the elements are physical, economic, legal, and non-realty components, which we will discuss in the following discussion. Remember that the elements and sequence of adjustments are not limited to the following illustration stated. The final step would be reconcile the value. In reconciling value indications in the sales comparison approach, the appraiser evaluates the number and magnitude of adjustments and the importance of the individual elements of comparison in the market to judge the relative weight of a particular comparable sale should have in the comparative analysis. So, getting to the core of our discussion, we are going back to the fourth step, which is adjusting the elements. In comparing those elements, appraisers can use comparative analysis. Basically, comparative analysis is a process by which a value indication is derived in the sales comparison approach. It may employ quantitative or qualitative techniques, either separately or in combination. Quantitative techniques are available to quantify adjustments to the sale prices of comparable properties. The techniques are data analysis, statistical analysis, cost-related adjustments, and capitalization of income differences. This technique is often applied whenever sufficient information is available to support for making quantitative adjustments. Meanwhile, qualitative analysis appears when there are inefficiencies of real estate markets and the difficulty of expressing adjustments with mathematical model. Some qualitative techniques that are required in forming a conclusion are trend analysis, relative comparison analysis, and ranking analysis. Along the way, the basic elements of comparison considered in comparative analysis are the following. As you can see, the top 5 of the list are considered to be transactional adjustments, while the others are included in property adjustment. The main difference of these adjustments is, in transactional adjustment, we need to apply it in a specific sequence. On the other hand, property adjustments do not need to be applied in that manner. As for ourselves, we, Directorate General of State Asset Management, major in appraisal, are applying one of the comparison techniques, which is the statistical analysis, specifically the regression analysis. The reasons we are conducting this technique are: it's been used for mass appraisal by property tax appraisal, as it is the logical choice for tax assessment. And second, the regression modeling is more resource efficient than performing a conventional appraisal for each property in a large district. One of the real applications of regression analysis that we conduct is for indicating the rent value of the ATM or automatic teller machine. It is known that identifying the rent of ATM needs a mass property. And logically speaking, it wouldn't be good for an appraiser to conduct the inspection of all the properties one by one each time, as it would be inefficient. By generating regression analysis, appraisers develop mass appraisal models to improve productivity. Note that by performing regression analysis, an adequate set of data is highly.
Assalamualaikum.
Waalaikumsalam, Pak Arif.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Baik, izin bergabung.
Ya Pak, selamat pagi Pak.
Selamat pagi.
Baik, izin Pak, mungkin webinarnya akan segera kita mulai.
Ya.
Ladies, gentlemen, and the audiences, we remind you again not to activate the sound or mute on your own Zoom application. Turn on your video and use the virtual background that can be accessed in the link tree or in the Zoom chat, because the webinar will begin immediately. Thank you. Peace be upon you, and may God's mercy and blessing upon us. Good morning, and best wishes to all of us. The Honorable Director of Valuation, Directorate General of State Asset Management, Arik Haryono, our outstanding speaker, Dr. Sidan Murphy, Global Director, Banking and Financial Services of Altair Singapore, all officials at the Ministry of Finance, and all the participants. Welcome to the first series of Evaluation Data Analytic Forum with the topic Property Rental Price Prediction Using RapidMiner on Tuesday, August 28, 2023. We thank God Almighty for His blessing and gift. We are still given a good health and the opportunity to be able to take part in this webinar. Let me introduce myself. I am Danang Agil, and I will get you through the course of webinar today from morning till the end. Allow me to inform you that the present link, today's material, list of questions, and the virtual background can be accessed via the link in the Zoom chat column. The today's schedule for our program these times are opening speech by Director of Evaluation, presentation by our outstanding speaker, question and answer session, and closing. Before we continue to our opening speech, let's take a moment of silence and pray. Let's the pray begin. Thank you. Dear distinguished speaker, friends, and colleagues, to start our webinar today, we humbly ask Director of Evaluation to deliver the opening speech. With all due respect, please welcome Mr. Arik Haryono.
Thank you, Mas Danang. What we respect, Secretary of the Directorate General of Management, Board of Directorate General of Asset Management, Head of DGSM, Regional Office, and Head of KPKNL, and also official and employee in the Ministry of Finance, and also ladies and gentlemen, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Salam, Om Swastiastu, Namo Buddhaya. Greeting of you too. May peace be upon us of all of us. Mohon izin, mungkin suasananya kurang nyaman karena saat ini sedang berada di DPR untuk menghadiri sidang paripurna. First of all, let us express our gratitude to the presence of God Almighty, because by His grace we can gather online and be given in good health. We would also like to thank and appreciate our speaker today, our senior speaker, Dr. Sidan Murphy, Global Director, Banking and Financial Services of Singapore. Distinguished participants, for the past couple of decades, we have seen a rapid growth in the availability of data and a much wider range of data sources. This is largely because of what? Because of the digital revolution, which has created a lot of data in its way. Data professionals are increasingly assessing this lot of the data and using it to derive insight of value, both privately and for public policy purposes. Being able to access and use data for policy development and also efficient service delivery has become a prominent part of the successful operation of the public service. As you know, we are all part of and contribute to a data-driven society. Numbers, metrics, and the endless ways we have come to quantify the many aspects of our society are now a part of everyday life. We use our phones or other devices to track how many steps we take, how many calories we consume, and how much money we already spent. This method has embedded all, which one and adjust for optimal performance data and literally helps us life today. This endless stream of data surrounds us, and as a society, we recognize how valuable a commodity data has become. Digital is a home for state-owned asset data. We know that state property based on the 2021 central government financial statement are released as a fixed asset with a valuable around 5.947 trillion rupiah. As for the fixed asset, there is land with the value of 541.8 trillion rupiah, as well as a building with a value of 420.14 trillion rupiah. Most of the land along with the building and structure is issued as a public building and office by government agency. This bunch of data would talk more than just a number. So, this forum is held to explore how data analytics can be successfully applied to accelerate evaluation and decision-making process. The Directorate of Valuation has initiated the development of rental valuation model since 2019 in some typical properties, and this year we developed valuation model for canteen. Distinguished guests, let's make good use of this valuable opportunity to discuss and explore new insights related to the practice of data analytics from the experts who have been with us in this forum activity. Hopefully, the things we learn today can positively contribute to decision-making process. Furthermore, for the smoothness and effectiveness of the event, I now declare that the forum on property rental price prediction using RapidMiner is officially open. Hopefully, this activity can be put a hold for us to be more professional Indonesian appraiser. Thanks, terima kasih. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Salam, Om, Santi, Santi, Santi Om, Namo Buddhaya, Salam Kebajikan.
Waalaikumsalam.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you, Mr. Arik. We hope, as Mr. Arik mentioned earlier, that the webinar session will give us a useful insight, fruitful discussion, and to contribute more to valuation, especially the data analytics. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, next is a photo session. I would like to ask all participants to activate the camera because we will take a photo for our documentation. Don't forget to give your best smile. Okay, starting from the first screen, 3, 2, 1. Okay, and the second screen, 3, 2, 1. The next screen, 3, 2, 1. And the last screen, 3, 2, 1. Okay, thank you for all your bright smile. And now we are getting into our core event. Our discussion today will be moderated by an outstanding moderator from Directorate of Valuation. We would like to introduce you to our moderator today. She is a very talented woman who started her career as a government officer since 2019 and is currently a staff member at the Subdirectorate of Standardization of Business Valuation at the Directorate of Valuation. In 2017, she graduated as a Bachelor of Petroleum Engineering in the Bandung Institute of Technology and Science. She has a lot of experience in training and conducting valuation. One of which of being a coordinator in the Ministry of Finance Strategic Data Analytic Initiative to prepare the valuation tool since 2021. Please give a big applause for our moderator, Cindy Clara Afriska.
Hello, Mr. Danang.
Hello, Cindy. Good morning.
Good morning.
How's your feeling, Cindy?
Yeah, it's been great, and I'm so excited to prepare today's event, Danang.
Oh, yeah, that's great. Are you ready to get to this webinar, Cindy?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, Cindy, for the next few hours, time is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Mas Danang. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Shalom, Om Swastiastu, Namo Buddhaya, greeting of virtue, my peace be upon us all. The Honorable Director of Evaluation, the Honorable Distinguished Speaker, the Honorable Heads on Employees of Chief Transformation Organization, CTO, Secretary of General, Ministry of Finance, the Honorable Heads of DGKN Regional Officers and KPKNL, the Honorable Officials and Employees in the Ministry of Finance. Ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to today's event on Forum Data Analytics Series 1 about property rental price prediction using RapidMiner. I'm Cindy, your moderator for this session. We are thrilled to have a participant from internal of Ministry of Finance joining us today. This webinar will be conducted in 2 languages, although in this event, we have an international speaker, but we still welcome questions and comments in Bahasa. The committee will make efforts to provide translation for all communication today. We encourage active participation from all attendees. You can use the slider link on the column chat on the link tree to ask questions or share insights throughout the presentation, and we will do our best to address as many as possible. We have allocated time at the end of presentation for question and answer. You can also ask directly in the session. Mohon izin Bapak Ibu hadirnya yang berbahagia, kami akan memandu diskusi ini nantinya pada sesi question and answer dalam 2 bahasa, yakni bahasa Inggris dan juga bahasa Indonesia. Jadi apabila ada pertanyaan dari Bapak Ibu hadirin dapat disampaikan melalui Slido ataupun secara langsung baik menggunakan bahasa Inggris atau bahasa Indonesia. This webinar is being recorded and the recording will be made available to all registered participants afterward. And if you fill the evaluation link, you will get also a certificate. Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, so I will start about something. Can the committee share the screen? Yes. And the page 2. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, generally speaking about data, we know that in here in our office at the DGSAM, we have a lot of tons of data which we can refer to as a big data. In this literature on the role of big data analytics in analyzing e-governance projects, from this study, I can highlight some information to you that is a crucial and multifaceted. It offers numerous benefits and advantages in enhancing the effectiveness, efficiency, and decision-making process within government initiatives. Here are some key aspects of the immensely beneficial role of big data analytics in analyzing in a government initiative, like data-driven decision-making, predictive analytics that we will get an insight from today's speaker, enhanced service delivery, resource optimization, and also the policy evaluation from the data analytics. Big data analytics enables governments, absolutely us, to predict future trends and events, providing invaluable insights for planning and resource allocation. For instance, like predictive analytics can assist in forecasting disease outbreaks like a pandemic, COVID-19, managing traffic congestion, and estimating the demand for public services. And in the evaluation itself in our field, that it can also contribute to determine the property values. However, as we know that the data is growing exponentially, and it has become challenging to analyze such a large volume of data stored at multiple locations if we know the comparison data that we use to measure the value of property. And using a traditional data mining tools, it could be difficult sometimes. So we have to find the alternative for analyzing large data set. It is utilized by the big data analytical tools. And these tools can equip with the capability to mine large data sets in a distributed environment, assist in examining and analyzing projects. So it can make easier for us to deliver the decision making and the right decision making. Therefore, this seminar today, we will focus on sharing a method using a RapidMiner. The tool is called a RapidMiner as a data analytic tool for predicting rental values. Furthermore, today's discussion on big data analytic tools and techniques aims to provide support for making a better decision in managing assets and serving stakeholders with a focus on optimizing asset utilization. That's all the thing that I can say about why we conducted today's webinar. So ladies and gentlemen, it is my distinct pleasure to introduce to our speaker, a true expert in data analytics. He is a Dr. Sidhan Murphy, brings a wealth of knowledge and experience to our event today. Dr. Sidhan holds a Master of Science and Philosophy of Doctor in Ecology and Evolutionary Biology at University of Toronto, Canada, and have spent 12 years dedicated to the data analytics fields. He's making a significant contributions and achieving remarkable milestones along the way. He began their career at Rational Analitik Incorporated, where he honed their skills and laid her foundation for his journey. Then played role as a data scientist at Altair Engineering. And currently, in recent years, Dr. Sidhan has taken on increasingly prominent roles in this industry. He has become the Director of Solution Specialist, Data Intelligence, in APAC Altair Engineering, and currently holds the position of a Global Director, Banking and Financial Services in the Altair Singapore. So without further ado, please join me in giving a warm welcome to Dr. Sidhan Murphy. Hello, good morning, Dr. Sidhan. Hello.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Hi there.
Hi, how are you doing, Dr. Sidhan?
Oh, I'm all right. I don't like seeing the old photo of myself. It reminds me how far I've decayed. But thank you for the introduction.
Okay, thank you. You still look so young. Thanks. Okay, we are honored to have you here with us today, and we look forward to your presentation. Let's dive into the presentation. If you're ready, Dr. Sidhan and team.
Thank you. So
Yeah,
just before, so I will be focusing, so again, thank you everyone for the introduction and thank you for the welcome. I will be speaking about the analytics project, property prices for prediction, but I would like to do just a quick introduction to the company, Altair, from which I come, which is going to be led by my colleague Lynette. So she'll just come on, she'll give a quick introduction, and then I'll get into the topic, the analytics topic.
Okay, Sidhan and team, please time is yours.
Thanks, Lynette, go ahead.
Hi, everyone. Just making sure that you can see my screen.
Yeah.
Okay. So in today's presentation, I'm just going to start off with an introduction to RapidMiner and also Altair, which is the RapidMiner company. Altair is in the areas of simulation, high-performance computing, data analytics, and AI. We are listed on the NASDAQ, and we have 74 offices in 27 countries. And in Altair, we employ more than 3,000 plus engineers and data scientists to ensure that our data analytics products can meet the use cases of our customers. So as you can see here, we work a lot with major financial firms and banks. And because we are in different industries, you can see here also our reach in all the different industries globally. So coming to RapidMiner, Just as a brief overview of what RapidMiner is, it's an end-to-end data science platform which makes machine learning and data analytics accessible to everyone. So it doesn't matter whether you are from the business or from the data, or you're from the data expert team, or you're from IT or from leadership. Everyone can use the same platform together because we have something called an automated interface, which is guided, it's wizard-driven, and it's good for business users who don't know how to code to do predictive and prescriptive analytics without having to write a single line of code. And then we have the visual interface, which is like a drag and drop interface. And then also, of course, we have the coding interface in case the data scientist wants to code. So on RapidMiner, you can connect and get data from any data source. It can be from your PDF files, Excel files, reports, databases, data lakes. It can connect to everywhere and pull in the data into the platform. It has very good ETL automation capabilities, so it means that the platform can guide you to clean and prep your data. Once the data is cleaned and prepped, it's where you can start creating all your models, like the regression and classification models. For fraud detection, we have anomaly and outlier detection, we have clustering, we have segmentation. You can also do text analysis and NLP. And on RapidMiner, there is also the power of deep learning algorithms, which is able to learn from large changing data sets and adapt accordingly. And on RapidMiner, you can deploy your models live onto your enterprise applications for monitoring and reporting. You can also visualize all your data and the output of your models in dashboards looking like this, which is easy for your team to customize, to edit, and manage on their own. So as mentioned on RapidMiner, each person, each different persona gets to experience a native experience. Like, for example, there's the automated data science interface, which is guided, it's interactive, it's wizard-driven, for people from the business who doesn't know coding to use prescriptive and predictive analytics and to find and create the models that they want. And then we also have the visual drag and drop workflow, which looks like this for citizen data scientists to use. And for expert data scientists, you can switch to the multi-coding interface and you can code in the different languages like R, Python, SQL, SAS language, etc. You can choose to use and work in the interface of your choice. And why it's important this way, it's because we need everyone in the business to work together on the same platform. Because people from the business, they are more familiar with the problems and issues on the ground, whereas the expert data scientist is better at working with the data. So by having this way, by having it in this way, everyone can work together on the same platform, on the same project from beginning to the end. So on RapidMiner, we offer you frictionless AI. There will not be any friction between users and the data because the data can work and come from any source. There is no friction between data and domain experts because regardless of your skill level, you can use RapidMiner. It's simple to use. It's a low-code, no-code interface. And then there's no friction from idea to production because on the platform, there's AutoML, there's machine learning, there's AI. It can be guided, it can be wizard-driven. And there's also no friction when tools, vendors, or your infrastructure changes because you can deploy on-premise or you can also deploy in the cloud. Also on RapidMiner, we have something called the Center of Excellence. So if you need help to understand your data, your business, to do your data prep for you, to create models, to deploy your models, we have a specific team to help you with all this. And also online, we have something called RapidMiner Academy, which has courses for you to attempt, like there's different certifications for different personas. Even the simple beginner users can try to use RapidMiner and understand what is machine learning and what is data science. So on this screen here, it shows you how popular RapidMiner is. It's used by a lot of global organizations, universities. We also have an online community, which has more than 1 million members. And it has won awards from Forrester, Gartner, Dresner, G2 Crowd. And at the bottom, there are different companies from different industries who have been using RapidMiner. Also, this slide is the last one. I just want to let you know that from Altair, It's not that once you subscribe to RapidMiner, you can only use RapidMiner. Because on Altair, if let's say you have RapidMiner, actually you can access the rest of our data analytics product. So besides RapidMiner, we have something called Altair Monarch, which is an ETL tool for data collection, data cleansing, and data transformation. So if let's say you have data coming from many different sources, PDF files, Excel files, databases, data lakes, you want to extract all this data and put them into a predefined format. Altair Monarch can do this automatically for you, instead of you having to copy and paste, which is quite manual and it's prone to error because of human manual labor. And then we have something called Altair Knowledge Studio, which is very good for creating risk models and credit scorecards. We also have Altair Panopticon, which is a real-time visualization tool. And in today's demo, Dr. Shidan Murphy will be showing you the RapidMiner and also Altair Panopticon, how they can be linked together. And at the bottom, we have something called SLC. This is for organizations who have been using SAS language programs. If, let's say, you're using SAS language programs, it's a legacy language. Nowadays, people would be using more towards Python, R, and SQL. And a license from the SAS Institute to run your SAS language programs is very, very expensive. So on Altair, we offer you an alternative. Our Altair SLC can run SAS language programs together with R, Python, and SQL programs together in our SLC compiler. And the output that you will get is the exact same output as you get on the SAS Institute license, but we offer it to you at 50 to 70% reduction of the cost of a SAS Institute license. So overall, these are the products that we have on Altair. You can access any of these products if you wish to. And I'm just going to pause here and hand it over to Dr. Shidan Murphy to take us through the demo now.
Thank you, Lynette. Okay. So, all right. I'll just share my screen. Okay. So today I'm going to talk to you a lot about your data. I'm going to talk to you a lot about the techniques that I took to get to your conclusion. But I'm also going to talk a lot about what data science is, some of the principles, and really what not to do to be successful. So the pitfalls that you need to avoid. Personally, I found this challenge or the data that you sent me pretty interesting, but it was very challenging for a number of reasons. And I'll take you through my experience with that. But before I do that, let me talk to you about what is data science and why you'd want to learn it and why we even need it to be effective decision makers. And so, first of all, what is data science? A lot of people think that it's just this totally automated way of building out complex models in which everything is automated and the machine does all the work. That's really rarely the case. Normally, it's people really struggling to make sense of the data. You're dealing with experts. You're in the business domain. You're really trying to understand. You're visualizing the data. It's often a very manual process. And so the question is, why do we need this? Why can't we just make the conclusions that we're normally so good at making? And so just to be clear, when I say predictive analytics, some people call this machine learning, some people call it artificial intelligence. Let's just agree for today, just say they all mean the same thing. predictive analytics, ML, AI, machine learning, artificial intelligence. So the question is, why do we need it? And so my question for you is, what do you see on the screen in front of you, encircled in red? And so I'll take off the red circle just so you might be able to see it a bit better.
Sorry, Sidan, for the interruption.
Yeah.
I think I still don't see your share screen.
Oh, you don't see the screen?
Yeah.
Oh, that's not good.
Okay.
Can you see it now?
Yes.
Yes.
It's clear now.
Oh, okay. Well, you didn't miss anything. So there we go. But glad you told me now. Now, let me just make sure I've got the chat open. Okay. So the question is why do we need predictive analytics? And so the question is, what do you see here in front of you? And I'll just circle it in red so you can see it a little bit better. When you look at this image, what do you see? Most people, they're able to see the beginning of a face. Although someone actually put in the correct answer. So what we see a bit of a nose here. We see a bit of a bit of an eye, nose, cloud forming face. If you see a face, you're totally wrong. The person who correctly answered this as being a cloud with a silver lining, very good, optimistic expression, it's wrong. It's not a face. Perhaps it is. It's just sky. But what our minds are really, really, really good at doing, I see my bright future. I want to work in your office. Everyone is so optimistic. But what our mind is really good at doing is our mind is really excellent at making patterns out of noise. This is why we're the only group that are able to say, enjoy taking a look at cloud forms and saying, oh, that looks like a dragon, that looks like a face, that looks like whatever. And that's because from an evolutionary perspective, we have the ability to react very quickly and draw conclusions. So I'm calling these weird beliefs. These are weird beliefs that we form that we take random noise, random events, whether they be lucky, something good happened to you on a particular day, so that becomes your lucky day, or we develop mental patterns for, things that are going to make me successful. I'm wearing my lucky shirt, whatnot. This is a typical human pattern. And everyone has these beliefs. And they're not extreme beliefs. They're just, what people believe. And we have come upon this very honestly, because if you think about how we evolved as basically lunch for powerful creatures that were meat eaters in the jungle. And so we were soft, we were, I'm sure, we had very little ability to defend ourselves. And so we evolved to perceive threats from noise. This is where that decision-making pattern evolved for us. And so our brain is wired to anticipate threats. So imagine a situation where you're on the savannah, you're in the jungle, wherever, and you hear something, a rustle in the wind. And I'm sure many of you see shapes at night and get spooked. And so when we hear something, when we perceive a threat, from an evolutionary perspective, from a safety perspective, it's far better for us to say that's a real threat and be wrong and still survive than say, that's probably nothing, and then be eaten by the animal and not survive. And so from an evolutionary perspective, we have evolved to perceive threats out of all noise. And so if you can see there right now, there's a predator staring at you in the grass. And if you can see the predator, in that grass field there, circled in red, your mind has tricked you again, because actually the predator is staring at you in the center of the screen. But this is how a lot of hypnotists work, a lot of magicians work, a lot of illusionists work. They're able to make your brain draw connections and allow you to formulate conclusions that are totally wrong. And this is really why data analytics was born and why we need it, because our whole being, our whole mind is wired to make predictions and draw conclusions when there's nothing actually happening. And so in this way, we have to be conscious of this even when we're doing predictive analytics and when we start thinking about the problems that we're trying to solve. And so I've given you sort of hypothetical, a cloud, a predator in the bushes, explanations about how our mind draws conclusions around predictive analytics. Let me show you a real world example about how sometimes our assumptions that we draw can lead to totally incorrect conclusions. And so this is a real example. And I like this example because I like airplanes, and this is all about airplanes. And so in World War II, they obviously, the people from the UK and the US were sending bomber jets over into German occupied territory to release their bombs. And they had a lot of these airplanes were being shot down, a lot of machinery was being lost, a lot of lives were being lost. And so the engineers were left trying to understand how to save their planes from destruction and pilot lives. And so the obvious thinking is, well, we should add armor to the planes. And so this was the analytics journey that they went on. Where should we add armor to the planes to save lives and save machines? But the problem with armor is you can't just add armor to an airplane. It increases the protection. It increases the protection from bullets and shrapnel, but it does a whole bunch of bad things for the airplane too. If you're trying to avoid fighter planes and dodge in and out of flak, it reduces the speed of the airplane. It reduces how far it can go because the plane is heavier. It reduces how maneuverable the plane is. It reduces the amount of weight that the plane can carry for additional things like people and ammunition and gas and that sort of thing. And because of all of that, it increases the probability of the plane getting hit. So this is a very typical analytics problem. So it's constrained optimization, where do we want to apply armor to the airplane such that we can maximize its protection, but also maximize its capability as a vehicle of war in this case. And so what they did was the engineers took a look at all the planes that made it back from Germany, and they drew out on a map of an airplane, a schematic of an airplane, where did the bullets hit? And so this is what they did. And they put all these bullet holes on it and said, okay, this is where the plane is getting shot. And you would then think, well, if the plane is getting shot here, we should put the armor right where the plane is getting hit. But actually, this is what they call our first, and so this is a reasonable conclusion, reasonable assumption. But actually, the answer is 100% totally wrong, because this is where the planes were getting hit and the planes were returning. What it's not showing is it was not showing where the planes that were getting hit and being shot down. And so this is one type of bias that we call survivorship bias. And so where they need to armor the plane to maximize the protection is in these critical junctures. At the narrow plane of the narrow part of the tail, the wings by the spars, and the engine itself. And so they were nearly about to put armor in the worst possible spot, and then they realized the bias that they were about to put in, and then they covered up the appropriate part. And so this is the most important part of doing analytics, especially when you begin to think about software systems and platforms that move into totally automated processes. Because unless you can mentally explain your conclusions, it's not always critical in this case, but typically you want to be able to mentally explain the conclusions in a reasonable way, then you're less likely to be making that sort of biased mistake. So you should be able to take a look at your results and say, yeah, okay, so these variables, these should be producing this sort of result. I'm expecting this sort of result. So you do want at least a directional understanding about how your observations are going to affect your conclusions. And so this is often the difficult part of an analytic problem, is formulating the problem statement correctly. Another key part of statistical ability and capability is what we call statistical significance. Statistical significance. And so my name is Shadon Murphy. So this was part of Murphy's Law. It's a list of like 10, 15 laws. This was up in my bedroom growing up as a kid. So I like the statement. The race is not always to the swift, nor the battle to the strong, but if you're going to bet, that's the way to bet. So much of our life, we see events that happen and we believe we can make a conclusion around that particular event. And so if you think about your favorite sport, cricket, basketball, or soccer, or whatever, when you have a tournament, you assume that that tournament, let's say there's a round of 7 games to determine the ultimate winner. The winning team is going to be the best team. And so the group that wins 5 out of 7 or 4 out of 7 of the games is crowned the champion. We therefore know that it's the best team. But this, again, is a fallacy in human conclusions because, well, let me prove it to you. So statistical models is based on something called a p-score, or p equals 0.05. It's a measure of error, essentially. And so imagine this situation where you have a team, team A and team B, and you somehow have the ability to rate and rank these teams perfectly. You can calculate exactly how much better team A is over team B. And each of these teams are facing each other in a tournament, and there's 7 games in that tournament. And they need to win, I can't actually remember the statistics. I think that they have to win 4 out of the 7 games to be crowned champion. So in the first match here, in this first matchup, in this first tournament, who would you bet on? It doesn't really matter, right? Because team A and team B are totally equal. So you can bet, if you were to bet on team A or team B, doesn't matter. For team A in the second tournament versus team B, who would you bet on? Team A has a 5% advantage. Obviously, you're going to be betting on team A. But maybe, you know, there's some chance that team B is going to win, but you're more likely to win if you were to say team A is likely to win. This one, the third tournament, obviously there's no argument. Team A is almost certainly going to win. There's 67 to 33% advantage. But when you put in statistics in front of this, and you ask yourself the question, statistically speaking, what's the probability of the inferior team winning? According to statistical conclusions, none of these probabilities, 50-50, 55-45, 67-33, actually have any likely chance of occurring. So statistically speaking, if you were to rank these teams and do a statistical model, you would say there's no difference between team A or team B winning. And so in this case, the probability of the inferior team winning is 20%. Here 30, and now here 50. In statistical theory, we have to expand this significantly in order to draw a conclusion. So even in the most extreme difference, 67 to 33%, the teams have to play 23 games in order to draw that level of statistical satisfaction of what we call less than 5%. So we have to be, so this is the what we're accustomed to in our everyday life, 7 games and team A is team B, team A is the winner. In statistical theory, this is the degree of granularity that we get. But more often or not, we tend to draw our conclusions with less robust statistical groups. Okay. And so just bringing this all together, there is because of these features of ability to draw conclusions from noise, our ability to introduce bias into our results, and our desire often to draw conclusions when there is no statistical reason to do so, academic science in general is going through what they've called the replication crisis. And so if you take a look at academic journals and scientific papers and basically take their results and try and repeat it, what you'll find apparently is a significant amount of these experiments cannot be repeated. In other words, they used poor practice and they drew a sense of conclusion because of their biases and so on. And when we try and say, okay, can we repeat it? We can't. And so this is a big problem because the way knowledge extrapolates is we do what we call standing on the shoulder of giants. And so we take other people's work and then we expand it. But what if the other people were wrong? And so this is just sort of a real world application or consequence of some of those issues I've just described. So how do we go about then operating such that we reduce the tendency for us to fall victim to some of these fallacies? So this is the overview of the model building process that I've got here for you today. So basically any model begins with data. Data can come from a number of different sources. You can do what we call a simulation or collect other sources of data. And Altair, my company, has tools to develop that sort of simulated data. You can collect your own data as you have in this particular example, and I'm about to present. And then we also have the ability to stream data from sensors or satellites, for example, or other types of what we call Internet of Things technologies. Then we take one or some of these data sources and we build a statistical model. And then with that statistical model, we test it. Not all the time, and I'll talk about when you wouldn't. In this case, with your data, actually, I didn't validate the data, and I'll tell you why. But what's important critically, once you build a statistical model, you want to be validating it all the time. You want to be testing it just to see if the model is failing or there's some sort of bias or whatnot. And then from that machine, once this is all done, then you can actually get good predictions. This whole process of going from data to model building to go ahead and deploying these models in the form of predictions is encapsulated in something called CRISP-DM, which stands for Cross-Industry Standard Process for Data Mining. It was long time ago, a bunch of intellectual types from IBM that put together, or they attempted to put together and did so, a standard operating procedure for doing analytics. And it begins here with understanding your business objective. understanding the data associated with that business objective, preparing the data, modeling, evaluating the model, deploying the model, and then monitoring that model over time. The one thing I want you to notice, though, is notice all the back and forth arrows. So the steps here in a predictive analytics cycle is not continuous. You're all over the place. You're going back and forth, and there's a big circle over here indicating you rinse and repeat, and you always have to do this again. Most of your work in data analytics results in no way forward. You do something and then you have to go back from the beginning, and then you start all over. You're constantly going back and forth. So what are the key components to a machine learning model? And what do you have to be careful about? Interestingly, all of your data had all of these issues. So it actually represented a really interesting data model for me to demonstrate some of the challenges with building these data. So there are three components to building statistical models: data, obviously the model, and then validating the model. So with the data, the thing you need to be most concerned about is low quality data, influential outliers, and small sample sizes. And I'm going to talk about all of these this in a moment. And then with a model, you have to be concerned about the assumptions of the model and a lack of statistical significance. And so the assumptions are things like sample sizes, things like correlated variables and linearity. And every single model has a list of assumptions, or virtually every model has a list of assumptions that you need to be concerned about. And validation, it's important for you just to continually test the model to see if it's still accurate. That's what validation means. You get new data, you run it through the model, you get the prediction, and then eventually you get the actual result and you compare it and you make sure it's okay. So let's talk about your data and what it looked like. And I'll introduce the columns and the key features of the data and what we're actually trying to predict. So again, most of the time, you're doing an analytics project, most of the time you're going to be doing data transformations and trying out different things. The best thing to do when you get data is to look at it. That's the easiest and most effective way to start a process. I used a dashboarding tool called Panopticon. That's our product. I plotted all your data, took a look at it where it was from a geographic point of view, started to play around with different things and got myself oriented on what the data looked like. Then the next step is to start building out statistical variables. And if possible, look for external data sets to see, well, how can I improve my models? When you're doing all this, my experience, my personal experience is if you're stuck over a computer, really struggling, making all sorts of variables and trying different things, it's really easy to do unhelpful things and make bad variables that you're just not thinking right. So, I mean, I always take this easy. I often go for walks when I'm doing data analytics project, let my mind think. No one believes me, but I'm actually working when I'm away from my desk, thinking about the project. Because if you get too focused, you can tend to not see the big picture. And this is always important, to see the big picture when you're doing this, because you're 3 or 4 steps away from building the model, but you need to start thinking about building the model at this step. So you need to think about big picture, the question you're trying to answer, and then the model. And when you're doing the data and the data part now, don't be too disappointed, because 90% of the work you do will result in no result. Most of it will be a waste of time, but that's okay, because that's how you learn about the data. Nothing wrong with it. So this is the data that I was using. So this is obviously Indonesia. I'm over here in Singapore. And you have data across this area of, I think it was about 5 geographic areas in states, I guess, in Indonesia, Batam, and a few others, but we'll go over that. So this is the raw data. So we had the office names, which was the target of interest, the specific address, the rental type, the coordinates, the lats and longs, the point of interest, and the nearest point of interest and the coordinates. All total, I had 119 different rows. That was the starting point, and 21 different columns. So these are the first group of columns. And we're trying to understand the value, the actual fair market value for the office name here. Okay, so we had a description of the location. Oh, sorry, we had the area of the location. This is the first area of, this is the first group of variables we had. Then the second thing we had was the tenancy agreement around this, the size of the space that was rented, how much they were paying. This was another group. And then we had another set of columns that was around the facilities and orientation of the property. So did it have air conditioning? What was the shape of the land? How many potential visitors? What were the operating hours? Parking lot, yes or no? And so this really turned out to be the key data. I think you can do some more things with lats and longs. We'll talk about that later at the end of the presentation. But for now, given the time I had, I primarily focused on these variables here to really understand how can we estimate the fair market value of the data. Okay, so just a few when you start doing data analytics in another program outside of Excel, that would make things a lot easier. So the first thing is this format. So this is the original format for the Excel file. It can be a little frustrating to work with when you put it into another program, because there's like all sorts of extra rows here, for example. So this is generally bad practice. When you've got multiple column names split over 2 rows like this, you have to break them up. So you see, I put office name and then here, and then office name, and then that abbreviation here. That would be one suggestion. I would also suggest removing the column number here. So we've got 0, 1, 2. There's lots of good reasons for that. The biggest one is it can confuse the data type on import. And we might want to consider splitting the address across into several different columns. We have software, and I used software to fix this for us automatically, but this is what we call Altair Monarch. But if you don't have to do it, even better. And then maybe even, and then there's some other little things. So a lot of the numeric fields had a comma here, or a colon here, no, apostrophe, and that makes it a text field. So some of it was text, some of it was numeric. So better just not to do that and make it an equal, use equal instead. Some of the lats and longs were in different formats. And this one, the rental price per year had a mix of comma and period. And the problem with that is when you convert this value to a numeric one, the zeros end up disappearing. So 6, because it removes trailing zeros, especially after the second period. This is totally typical when you start getting into data analytics. And when you start that first part of the CRISP-PM, data understanding. You get data, then you spend a lot of time looking at the data, really understanding it in a way that perhaps a lot of people wouldn't, finding the issues, going back, looking forward, seeing if they're outliers, seeing if it's real. And so this is typical, but just some advice. So you really want to standardize the format. I had a few issues, a little bit concerns about data quality in the data, and the concerns could be influencing outliers. And in a moment, I'm going to talk about the dangers of outliers in a statistical approach. But so several observations in your data had zeros for rental space. So it doesn't make sense. You wouldn't rent, as far as I can understand. 0 means no space. It might mean something else entirely. But So I just removed those observations that had zeros in them. So that was only 3 observations. And then you had one column that was the number of potential visitors. So I assume this is predictions within predictions. Nothing wrong with this approach. It's often a good idea to do this, to have a model producing a column that we use in another model. But unless this is accurate, it can introduce subsequent error into underlying models. So, but I still use this, this variable, so there's no problem. Okay, so that was the first step in my building the model, really going through the data very carefully, looking at all the observations. The software that I was using, RapidMiner, actually alerted me to these observations as a process to do it automatically. So although I looked at it, RapidMiner identified the issues for me automatically. Once this was done, the next thing I did was simply just to look at the data. And I found a couple of outliers I was concerned about, and outliers can be a problem. And I'll show you why. So this is an example here, and outliers are a bigger problem if you have smaller amounts of data as well. And so your data set was relatively small, 109. We started with 119 observations. I've just removed 3 because of the zero, rental space is 0. So now we're 116 observations. And I want to show you the influence of outliers. So this is a real data set here. It's called the iris data set, and it's flowers actually. And so it's plotting the dimensions of flowers here. And so the real relationship between the various components of this, like the sepal and petal length size or something. And so this is the real relationship. But let's say you made a mistake in measuring something. You instead of reporting it as millimeters or centimeters, maybe you recorded it as millimeters. So something silly that you did. And what you ended up doing was you created a point down here that was a mistake. So this black line is the relationship between the data. And then if you add one single point, only one mistake, it totally changes the relationship, it can totally change the relationship here, which is in red. And so what we have now is not only a slightly different relationship, but an opposite relationship. The correct data was actually showing a positive relationship. So as this part of the flower increases, this part of the flower increases. That's what we would expect. One outlier reverses the relationship. It's showing actually as this part of the flower increases, this part of the flower actually decreases. So it's totally wrong, all because we made a small mistake here, which is maybe we were measuring in centimeters before and now we're doing it in millimeters, or we just read the number wrong, forgot our glasses or whatnot. So you have to be very careful with outliers. The best way to find outliers is to simply look at the data. There's statistical ways to do it, but the best way to do it, and the way I've always learned it, just look at it. That's the easiest way to do it. But be very careful with when you decide to remove an outlier. You can't just remove an outlier because you don't like the data. You have to only, my advice is to only remove the outlier if there's obvious measurement error, like there has to be, it just doesn't make sense, or there's some structural reason to remove them, some reason to say, yeah, no, we should remove it. So let me talk to you about the outliers in your data. So this was the first, this outlier must be a mistake. So these have been removed. The second thing I did was to take a look at the rental space. And I simply plotted the rental space. So this is the rental space per meter squared, or the rental space in meters squared on the x-axis, and the frequency on the bit. So we can see almost all of our locations that you rented out were below. It was around like 160 square meters. That covers 95% of your data. And then I was left asking the question, is it reasonable then for someone to rent, say, a 2, 3, 4, 5 square meter place, and then you're going to use that exact same statistical model to evaluate someone who's renting a 1,400 or 2,000 square meter place? No, it's probably not fair. So that's the structural reason to remove these data, saying basically what I'm saying here is we're going to build a model for smaller stores or smaller locations, cafeterias and whatnot, and then we're going to build a statistical model later on for bigger locations. And so I only focused on locations that were less than 200 square meters. That's a mistake. Less than 200 square meters, not more than 200, less than 200 square meters. And then what I did was I took a look at locations. I took a look at the rental price you were paying per year and the rental space. Actually, because I only analyzed spaces below 200 square meters, these locations were already all removed. But there was just one outlier I was concerned about. One space over here in which, for a very small location, you were analyzing the rental rate normally is like, down here, and it was probably 10 times bigger. So either that's a mistake or it's just a really unique location. Maybe it's like next to a tourist site, or no idea what it is, but something like that. It's so different from the normal that it would have the impact that I showed previously, where the relationship turned positive to negative. So basically I removed this observations. And so the data that I was analyzing was just basically this. So after I removed all those observations, I ended up going from 119 data to about 109. So I removed 11 or so observations. 108. And there were 100 observations across 5 different areas. Those areas are here, so Batam and other locations. And this is just a quick illustration that I made in RapidMiner. We've just got rental price per year by meter squared. And don't pay too much attention to here, but what I wanted to see very early on in this model building, what I definitely expected is as you increase the rental space size, we're going to see increased rent. That just makes sense, right? The bigger house you have, the bigger cafeteria, the more rent that you're going to be paying. And so at least I just wanted to check to see if that relationship was the same. The straight line here describes the average relationship. That's what we want to see. We want to see it all increasing. In this green location here, Pekan Baru. Baru means new, right? So I don't know, pecan must be a pecan, I don't know. But this seems to have the greatest sensitivity to area. One of my concerns when looking at this data was in Batam. Batam has lots of locations that are quite expensive for the given area. So we would normally expect the average price to be around here for Batam or the other locations for a given area. So it's up here. I assume this is because it's a tourist site or there's something particularly valuable in this location. But Batam, let's think about that a little bit later when we get into the modeling, but I wanted to bring that up. Okay, so we've been through a lot. I just want to bring everyone back to where we are. Essentially, all I've done to this point is I've gotten comfortable with your data. I've understood the columns. I've reviewed the data. And I have gotten into the point where I'm saying, okay, now I can begin to start thinking about what am I going to predict, and what is that, and what am I going to use to make my final prediction. In other words, I'm getting ready to build what we call our model building data set. And so you have many columns. I need to figure out how to use those columns to predict annual rent. So the technical term for what I'm calling this model is called supervised learning. Some of my concerns going into this is you have a very small data set. So this is going to make it very difficult to do something like a decision tree or random forest, because these are sensitive to small sample sizes. These are one of the model assumptions. So and at this point, I'm thinking, okay, I'm going to use these data to build out a linear regression or general linear model. What my big concern with building a model at this point is one thing: whenever you build a model, you want to use the fewest number of columns as possible. And I just want to make it clear, all the little nuances I found in the data, this is typical. No matter whether it comes from Singapore or comes from another location, every single data set that I have seen ever in analysis, you have to do this. There's always mistakes. This is just typical of data. So nothing surprising. This is exactly even in the biggest banks. Some of the biggest banks I work with still can't accurately calculate how much money they have. They can get close, the 2 or 3%, but so it's always a good objective to try and fix your data. It's an endless job. So if you want job security, be in charge of data quality, because you'll be working forever. But at this point, we have these data here where we know we're going to be building this. We want to have the fewest number of columns to go into the predictive model because of something called degrees of freedom. It's a little bit technical, the explanation, but basically it makes the model look better, but actually in reality, it doesn't do anything good at all. Okay, so the question is, what are we going to predict? And thinking about it, I had two things in mind. Do we want to say this is the average rent, or this is the average rent per meter squared? So we could go into, say, some location in Jakarta or Batam and say, okay, we're going to charge you 1 million rupiah per meter squared. How many meters squared do you want? You want 100 meters squared? Okay, so 1 million times a meter squared, that's your rent. Well, that'd be handy, because that takes into account the differences in area. I know that the two are related, so why wouldn't I combine them? And so do I want to predict annual rent price or annual rent price per meter squared? You have to be very careful. So this is an example of the actual data. So here's some data in Batam. Everything is the same here. Even if you take a look at the other data sets, it's very similar. The one thing that varies the most is the rental space. And so this is the rental price. So what should we predict? Rental price or rental price per meter squared? One problem when we're dealing with data of such large different scales between 1,530 square meters, and again, this is one reason actually why I got rid of some of these bigger guys. Remember, I only looked at less than 200 meters. One problem is when you divide this data, look what happens. Because this denominator is so small, you're only dividing the rental price per year by 2. And so in this case, you have to be careful, because you can say, okay, well, this, according to just the math alone, these two locations, a 2 square meter stall or a 6 square meter stall, is actually, incredibly valuable. In reality, there's just some minimum amount of money that an individual has to pay for a location, and it's not, that doesn't what they call linearly extrapolate. And so this is the problem with building out a predictive model just without thinking through some of the logic, because you have to be careful. And so because a lot of your spaces were very small and the range was pretty reasonable, what I just elected to do was just focus here on rental price per year. Okay, so this is what we're going to be predicting, rental price per year. I want to show you some of the dangers here with small data sets. So here is my first example, which is rental price per meter squared. So this is this variable. The one where I took the area and took the rent and divided it by space. So everyone knows when we're dealing with real estate, it's location, location, location. But, in other words, the better location, the more money that you can spend. But when we take a look here, so what we're looking at here now is what we call a decision tree. And what a decision tree does is it takes your data. In this case, we've got an average rental rate of 407 million, or 407,000 IDR per meter squared. And it goes through all the variables in the data, and then it ranks in an order of predictive power. So in this case, air conditioning was the best predictor. Whether it had air conditioning was the best predictor of rental price. And so if you were to build a decision tree like this, what we would see is air conditioner is the best predictor. Doesn't make a lot of sense in my mind. And there's only 3 observations here that are doing that. And so it's a little bit like, if you think through some of the logic, you'd say, well, hang on. If I have air conditioning in a building, my model is just going to say, okay, therefore we're going to pay you have to pay 5.7 million rupiah per meter squared. So this is the danger with small data sets and drawing these sorts of conclusions. So now there's ways to get around this, even in a decision tree, by various methods. But when you build this, hang on, does that make sense? No, intellectually, I know area is most important, so I'm going to force this in. Now, if we take a look at rental price and repeat this example, rental price per year as opposed to rental price per year per meter squared, what we can see here is the point of interest is coming out as most important. And so there's various points of interest, but what does this mean now from an analyst point of view? From an analyst point of view, all this is indicating is its location. And these points of interest, I assume, are in a particular state, and some states are just more expensive than other areas. Maybe it's the point of interest. Actually, you would probably know better than me looking at this, but I'd be thinking perhaps point of interest is really just trying to say something else here. So this is what you have to do when you start building models. You need to say, well, hang on, does this make sense? Maybe there's something else happening here. A big part of this reason is simply because the data sets are small. And when they're small, typically what happens is you can have really a single variable determining everything. And so for this reason, I try and avoid decision tree type approaches when you're building data sets. I don't know. So I got with some results from a previous analysis, and random forest was ranked as the most important. I'd be wanting to go through that data again pretty carefully for a few reasons, and we can talk about it later. But the R squared is small. I know the data set was relatively small. You could be experiencing something very similar to what I've just described. Basically, one explanatory variable affecting everything, maybe 2. But we can talk about that later. Okay, so I've explored the data. I've started to look at some things. What do I want to actually think about including in the model? The things that I want to include in the model will be definitely area. This is very important. I want the just because I know area is important, but for no other reason. I know area is important. And so these are all the individual areas. We can see the average rental price per year is very different from all of them. This is actually the entire data set. So remember I removed some of these, so it's going to look a little bit different, but you get the idea. It doesn't change that much. So these are the average rental prices for each of the areas: 39 million rupiah, 20 million rupiah. And so basically I quickly used our software, Altair, not Studio in this case, or also RapidMiner, to quickly sort this out. So I definitely know area is going to be in it. But what about these other variables, things like air conditioning, electricity, parking? Because we have such a small data set, I didn't want to include all of those variables separately. because of that issue with what we call degrees of freedom. And so the general rule, the fewer the variables that can go into the analysis, the better. And so what I did was I took those environmental variables, things like air conditioning, and I said, okay, if we take a look at this data and say yes and no, so yes, you have air conditioning, and no, you don't have air conditioning, which, and I thought about this before I made this plot in RapidMiner, which way should it go? Should a tenant be paying more if they have air conditioning versus if they don't? And the answer is, well, yes, of course they should be paying more. Like logically, it just makes sense. And so I did that and thought, yep, that's correct. So that's what I expected to see. And I do this because back into, the earlier introduction about the bias and making sure that we understand certain things, you want to build out these sorts of hypotheses before you actually see the data. Because if you look at the data and then build the hypotheses, that's when you can introduce your own type of bias. So, okay, so air conditioning, we've got yes, no. Environmental cleanliness, I would expect people to pay more in a location that's clean, which is what we see here, 9.3 million rupiah, and here is 6.7 or so. The difference between, the factor between these two is 1.5. The factor between these two is 3.5, but again, it's only based on 3 observations, so that's not that big of a deal. So, but directionally, it's correct. Water system, yeah, if they've got water, I'd expect them to pay more, and that's exactly what we see. Electricity, same idea. If they have electricity, I expect them to pay more. There wasn't that big of a difference between them. 1.1, a factor of 1.1, basically 8 to 9.2, but that's okay. Parking lot, yeah, if there's a parking lot, I'd expect them to pay more. So we have 5 different factors, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different factors. And we each know whenever the factor is yes or good, in this case, it has an effect of increasing the rent. The effect of increasing the rent is written here. 3.5, 1.5, 1.52, 1.1. I don't really trust that factor that much, because if you were to expand the sample size, there's only 9 observations that are in the no group, so that factor could be, pretty strong, or it might not be correct. But I feel very confident in saying I don't know the factor of, I don't know the accurate factor to do, but I do know that directionally is accurate. And so there's some questions around here about how in remote areas, how do you get this sort of data, and how do we collect this sort of information? This is always a challenge. You never have enough data. I've never spoken to a data scientist who said, I've got enough data, it's perfectly clean, I don't need any more, I don't want external data sets. So it's always a problem. I'm going to talk to you at the end about what I would do, and some future work around how to improve these data sets, and we can bring that, and I'll talk about that. It's at the end of the slide, or end of the presentation. Okay, so what we do know, and the presentation will be available on Linktree at the end for you to download. So there is this factor increase here that you can make. So I don't know the true nature of the factor, but I do know that it increases. So what I'm going to do, keeping in mind, I also don't want to put each of these variables into my final model because of the degrees of freedom issue, is whenever there's a factor that is in my favor, I'm going to count 1. And so, is there parking? Yes, this is 1. Is it clean? Yes, that's a 1. Electricity? Yes, yes. And then I'm going to take an average. So in this case, there's 5 possible factors. This location has 4 of them. 4 over 5, my environmental factor is 0.8. The greater the number, the better the environment. So I've now converted 5 variables into a single variable. The downside so the benefit of this is now I'm only increasing my degrees of freedom by 1 in my final model. The downside is the assumption is that the effect of parking is as good as electricity. The effect of parking is as powerful as having a clean environment. Parking as water. So this is the drawback. If we had more data, more accurate data in all these locations, and then maybe we can start doing something interesting. But I think actually this is probably pretty reasonable. It's going to at least be directionally accurate. So I've converted those 5 variables into one. The other data that I definitely wanted to include, so now we're including area into my final model. We're including that environmental factor into the model. To me, the no-brainer is to include the rental space into the final model. That should obviously the reason. I've just plotted the data now with no effect of area here. We have a very strong relationship. And we have a positive, so it's exactly as I'd expect. A little bit weirded out by all these guys. These are basically Batam, so a little bit strange, but whatever. Positive relationship for now, it's okay. We have now, this is the number of potential visitors. And so I feel very confident that this is a modeling data. This comes from some other model. Because there's no variation in the data. So someone's always predicting 100, someone's always predicting 50, someone's always predicting 40, nothing wrong with that. But there's something there. And, but it seems reasonable. As the number of potential visitors increases, the rent seems to increase. So I'm going to include that. This one I was a little bit confused on. I put on anyway. And I'll show you why I included it. This variable doesn't make any sense to include in a model. Like, this is why you always want to plot the data. I expected this to say, okay, well, as the number of operating hours increases, and I assume the hours of operations, we're going to charge them more rent. I just assumed this. But I took a look at the data and thought, well, hang on, there's no change here. Why would I include it? In fact, it seems to be going the opposite relationship. But actually, this is why it's important to build these hypotheses, because I thought, no, it should be increasing and it wasn't. I thought, well, let me drill down a little bit more because I'm a little bit surprised. And so what you do is if you overlay area on top of that. So now each of these points, their area, or the colors are different areas, the 5 different areas, and then you can begin to see some sort of pattern. A bit strange here in Batam, I have to say, but it's a little bit. So this probably won't come out to be that statistically significant, but I'm going to include it anyway. Okay, so this is my final building. This is my final build data set. I have environmental factor representing 5 different variables: operating hours, rental space, potential number of visitors by area, and my rental price. So I'm going to use these variables to predict it. Okay, so let's get into my model and my model validation and what I did. But first, just another quick hypothetical introduction here for you and some of the things you need to be a little bit careful about. For those people who are statistically inclined or familiar, I want you to interpret the graph. So I'm just going to pause for one moment. For those who are not statistically inclined, I want you to take a look at this data and I'll describe what this means. So I'll just pause and get a drink, but we're taking a look at ice cream sales in a city and my weight gain over a few years. So look at this, draw your statistical conclusions. What we're looking at, for those people who are not statistically familiar, this is the model equation of this particular line. And this is the R squared and p-value. So what we're looking at is a statistically significant variable. Remember our example about the sports thing, p.05. So this is a statistically significant relationship. and it explains 25% of the information in the data there. So what this is saying is for every, like say this is gallons of ice cream sold in a city, for every gallon of ice cream sold, which is X, I gained 0.58 of a kilo. Okay, so everyone think about this. It makes sense, but you have to be so careful because actually this is a subset of the data. And if this is actually a randomly generated data set, and if you expand the number of observations within that data set, this is the actual relationship. And so again, this is why, so it is statistical. So basically, although it's a statistically significant relationship, it's only statistically significant because the data set is small and it was just random chance. So in fact, although it's reasonable to make a conclusion, your data is wrong. Your conclusion is wrong because your data sets are small. And so if you were to increase the sampling within this data set, this is actually the true nature of the data. And again, this is why it's so important to build out those hypotheses, because why would the ice cream sales in a whole city affect my weight? I like ice cream, but I'm not going to change the amount of ice cream sold in a city. If this was my ice cream consumption and my weight gain, that would make sense, but not a city. And so this is why it's very important. So how do you avoid, when we start getting into model building, how do we avoid drawing this incorrect conclusion that we perhaps just made? So the first thing that we need to do is make sure we have sufficient sample size. If you don't have sufficient sample size and you have a statistically significant model, nothing wrong with that, but you just need to be aware in the robustness of your decisions. And the predictors need to make sense. Does it make sense that my weight is related to the city's ice cream sales? Make sure you follow the assumptions of a statistical test. You can just Google those and, or, you know, it's in books and it's everywhere. The other thing to do is if you're trying to, you know, the predictors need to make sense. Sometimes you need to go through and find high quality studies or literature and see what made sense in their experiment. And then say, okay, if that made sense, then we can go there. So in the sense of property evaluation, maybe we should be seeing, well, what's been published previously. Is it crime rates? Is it schools? Is it commercial density? And you can find those studies and then go look for those data in that area. The other way to do it is to do repeated experiments or analyses. And so you can basically build out a set of data in one location and then build out a bunch of causative factors and then test it in another location. This is possible. Simply looking at the data, hold out, the other thing to do is hold out your data. Build out holdout data samples. So in other words, you test your data on one subset of the data, or you build your models on one set of the data and then test it on another, and then be wary of outliers and removing them. But again, you can't just remove data because you don't like it. Make sure you have an actual reason to remove an outlier. Something that is extreme doesn't, just because it's different from something, it doesn't make it wrong. And so you should still keep it in unless you have a reason to remove it. And typically those reasons are measurement error, or there's just some structural reason to say, no, this is definitely different from these groups. Okay, so where are we now? So we have our variables with our annual rent. This is what we're going to be predicting. So this is the historic data that we'll be using, historical data going back a couple of years. And we're going to use these components to predict our annual rent. And then we're going to use this in a machine learning model or any statistical model to build out a set of predictions. And then in the future, what we want to do is we want to take data for which we don't know the annual rent, and then use that learning that we have from this historical data to build out a new set of predictions. Okay, so this is the goal of everything. So when I say machine learning models, this is a machine learning model. What is a machine learning model? There's different major techniques: Bayesian neural networks, genetic algorithms, other things, instant-based learnings. Basically, more or less, when people are talking about machine learning models, most people are doing two different classes of machine learning, something called neural networks, and the other one is called inductive learning. Inductive learning includes things like decision trees and linear models. Specifically, these are the types of very common statistical algorithms or machine learning algorithms, linear models, and these have different. So linear models is really where it all started, but these have branched into other families of statistical tests to handle data that don't necessarily fit the assumptions of linear regression, or they have a different need. So things like logistic regression or robust regression, there's regularized regression and linear discriminant analysis and general linear models. So these are basically more flexible features of a regression model. And then probably the most flexible of all the models is the decision tree model, because the very few statistical assumptions here. And then these have been made even more robust by doing something like it's decision trees within decision trees, basically, for all of these groups, called ensemble methods. And then there's other things, support vector machines and neural networks. So, but this is what basically people are building statistical models. 90% of the time, they're building one or all of these. So I built just a very simple general linear model to solve our problem using RapidMiner. This is, after all the data preparation I did, this was the final view. So it's just very simple to use. I've got a demo to show you how it was done. And I took this whole workflow, and I was able to build the model and then deploy it in a dashboard for you so that you can select the different features and then execute that result very quickly. And I'll show you those models and how it came on. And this is what the final result looked like when I used the model build data set by area. And I'll go over the details of the model, and I'll show you what was predictive and what wasn't. And I know it's not perfect because of all the issues that we described with small data samples and that sort of thing, but this is the end result. And I'll go over the R-squared and that sort of thing in a moment. I'll show that to you in the software. And so we have the prediction rental price here. So this is the predicted rentals, and then this is the rental price per year. And it's color coded by each of the areas here. So each of the areas are here. Batam had the worst performance of all the models. I'm assuming it's because of these groups out here. And I'm assuming it's a tourist area, something weird about those locations. I mean, you would know them, you would know the locations better than I would. And the R-squared, I'll show that to you now if you like. Let me show you the software, and then I'll get into the future work direction and what you might do, where I think my model can improve, and other things around model validation that I didn't do that I think would be a good exercise for you guys to do. So this is the software we have here. So this is what I built on RapidMiner. There's really two ways to do this. So the first thing I did, so this is the software. We have, let me just get this here. Okay. I don't need that. Okay, so this is the software. We have the ability to do everything I want over here. So these are all the drag and drop components of the software. So if I wanted to read a CSV file, or if I wanted to, do something, I'm able to take the components that you see here in the software and simply drag and drop it onto the canvas. So you can see I've retrieved a data set. I've gone ahead and I filtered the data. For my models, I've got all my models over here. So I've got 167 different models to choose from. I chose a relatively simple one in linear models. I don't know where linear models is within this group. So what I do is I just search for it, GLM, general linear model. That's right here for me, predictive. If I want to see what else is there in that family of algorithms, I can just close the search. And now these are all the features. I think, okay, these should more or less all fit what I want to do. I chose a general linear model, so I plot that, and that's where we have it over here. There were some additional statistics that I did try. They're not a native part of RapidMiner. So I did go into what we call the marketplace here, or the extensions. And so the extensions allow us to build out like packages for R, like Python or R, have additional packages. So if you want to do that, you can just search for the different statistical tests. So if you say you wanted to do like a deep learning, one of those neural networks, you can go find a deep learning package here. And I downloaded some of these for you guys, just trying different statistical tests. And so I'm able to build out my statistical models in this way, in the drag and drop way. We also have an auto model feature here. In this auto model feature allowed me to quickly view all of the data against hundreds of different models. It does it all for me automatically. And it quickly goes through and builds out 50, 60 models against I think it does about 8 models, but it does different types of permutations. And it builds out on your computer a simulator. And so the simulator allows us to say, this is my prediction, given my environmental variables, or given my, so in other words, you're able to change your predictions, the variables that you would use for a predictor to see how it would change your actual rent price here. So it's just you can deploy this in a dashboard as well. There's no problem. And you're able to, simulate, say, okay, well, I'm in this area, I'm in this location with this environmental count and this number of potential visitors. This is going to be my newly predicted area. All of this is just on my desktop, but you can put that into the cloud on a dashboard as a tool that people can use. I've also written here the number of potential, also here that ranks the data in what's important for the model. So it ranks the predictive factors. We have the performance of the model as well, and I'll go over this in greater detail. We have the predictions versus the actual, and we have the whole predictions chart showing how the data is working, and then the final model. And so we can do this for the model, and we can also build out a turbo, all the data preparation for you as well in here. So if you don't want to use the drag and drop interface, you can use a point and click interface here where you can say, hey, I really want to go ahead and clean this data automatically for myself and just do everything I need you to do for me. And it removes low quality columns, replacing missing values, and so on and so forth. So I did all of that. So I used some of the turbo prep for the design. I also built out this view, this point and click view individually for you guys. So I think I had one model here for importing the data. I did another one here for some data preparation. Remember how I said 90% of the time, most of the work you're going to do never does anything? All of this didn't do anything for me. So it was just part of an exercise. I only ended up using this column out of all of them. So I didn't even need any of this. And I built out many different statistical models here for you, all trying to understand what was happening. And so, but the final result here is, where is it? Oh, did I lose it? Okay, so here's the final GLM. I'll just go ahead and run this now, and I'll show you what the final result looked like. Just want to see. Okay, let's just, so remove that for now. Okay, so the full-on result, including the Batam, is here for me. So this is my statistical model. And so we can see here, we have our R squared is not particularly good, 0.27, and I'll talk about that in a moment. So my R squared here is 0.27, and I have all the p-values here. So I've kept all of the variables in. You can ignore these. This is just a way to analyze the areas separately. So don't worry about them not being non-significant at this point. I've kept them all in. These are the variables you need to focus on. So all of the variables, I put in rental space, number of potential visitors, environmental count are what we would call statistically significant. Operating hours was not statistically significant. It was 0.075, but because it's a small data set, I've kept it in. There is some judgment you can make there. It's probably not great practice, but it's sort of the reality when you're dealing with 100 observations and those 100 observations are subdivided by areas. So I'm going to keep it in, but I'm basically going to keep my eye on it. That's what it comes down to. So these are the key areas. We take a look at the standard coefficient to understand what the most important predictors are. And so if we sort on the standardized coefficient, negative means less rent, and positive is more rent. So these values are actually, these area values are compared to Batam. And so these two areas are going to have smaller, less rent than Batam, and these greater average than Batam. And then if we take a look at the other variables now, rental space. So if we sort on these coefficients, basically operating hours has a big influence, and then environmental count, number of visitors, and rent. In terms of the standardized, what we call standardized coefficients. And then if we take a look at the predictions here, we can just make a quick visualization of the predictions. So we've got prediction rent first year. This is without the area. Again, we can clearly see something a little bit unusual happening here. If we color code this by area, we can, let me just get the color code by area. Okay, color code area, where's, one moment. Just want to make sure I'm looking at the right thing. Apply model. Okay. There it is. So if we color code this by area here, we can see again, this is Batam, and there's 1 point over here. So, I mean, it looks reasonable. All the points are the same, but I want to show you what happens when we remove Batam from this result. So let's just go here and reactivate this one. This is removing Batam from the example. So it does not equal this value. And then, one moment. Okay. So now we'll rerun this. And what we see is the results dramatically improve. So the R squared went from 0.2 to around 0.7. And the statistical results are similar to what we would see. Everything's statistically significant here, very much so. And all of the areas are statistically significant as well. So some, in other words, there's something you'd probably want to build a unique model for Batam and keep them out from the others for now, because there's something significant happening there. If we take a look at the results now, and we take a look at the predictions, what does the predictions look like? Those are the predictions. And so the model has improved substantially. So anyway, so that's like some idea about, well, how can we, you know, so what, as all part of the data discovery process. So what I know as someone who isn't an expert in your data and your domain is when you remove that location, there's a massive improvement in the model quality. So either we keep in, we remove it, or perhaps we choose another statistical model that is more likely to be capable of isolating the effect of Batam from the others. And there's other statistical models that can do that. There's no problem. I just didn't do it for this presentation. Okay, so all of this is done here on my computer. So how can we make this into a tool that you can present to people in the field and give it to them so they can go out and they can press a button and get the answer, or you can give it to your manager who doesn't want to go through all of this themselves and get an answer. Very simple. What we do is we just go to our model here. So this is my model that I created. And we just want to right click and we want to store this area. So we store generalized linear model in the repository. And that's what we do here. And we store it, and then we have a deployment process. And the deployment is very easy. All we do is we just add, you can ignore all the stuff on the bottom. I forgot to exclude that. That's it. We just use this, what we call apply model method, and we upload it to our system here, which I have. One moment. Oh, here it is. Okay. Okay. So essentially, what we have is we have the a component here called AI Hub, and this allows me to upload all of that data, all of that project, all of the model into an area in which all of my colleagues can access. They can download my RapidMiner project, they can share it, they can move it. And so it's an area that allows everyone to collaborate. So here's our project, property rental price. And so I'm the only one working on this, but I did have a colleague helping me. And so if he had influenced this project, he can, you know, access it. And you see his name, but this allows, this is integrated with Git, if you're familiar with Git. And so this allows collaboration across a team, across geographies or areas, or even sitting next to each other and you just want to cooperate on the same projects. And so by doing that one change over here in RapidMiner, making this project, saving the repository, doing this, what I can do is I can create what we call this endpoint. And the endpoint, all this does is it lets me get a URL, which I can then take and embed it into our dashboarding product. And so our dashboarding product is part of this system. By the way, if you want to write R code or Python code, you can do that within our Jupyter notebooks here. We call it RapidMiner, but it's Jupyter notebooks. And all of those projects that you see located here, you actually have access to within Jupyter notebooks. And so you can access everything in here. You can export to here from code. So you can use these features here, this point and click transformation, or the turbo prep, or the drag and drop. That's two different ways for you to use it, the drag and drop, or these totally point and click methods. Or you can use this code only method. And so, but once you've built it, and once you're happy with it, you can then go ahead and you can deploy your dashboard. And so you click this button, and then you're able to start building out dashboards and workbooks. I happen to create a dashboard here for you. So the first component I have for you here is the geographic locations. So you've got lats and longs. And so you've got the features here that you can go ahead and see the data. I've got the various points of interest. So if you want to overlay those and look at different color codings and sizes, you're able to do everything there. So this is just for me to explore the data, zoom in, zoom out. You can put different layers in here and explore it. I have also generated a correlation coefficient between the major factors and showing you the raw data. And so if you want to see the correlation between the environmental factors, say between parking lot and air conditioning, or parking lot and environmental cleanliness, and so you can begin to explore these correlations. In your case, I've also gone ahead and I've built a simple tool here. This can be so much prettier, but I focused a lot on the model building, not a lot on this. It can look so much better. But if you wanted to choose a different area and you choose your rental price and you hit submit and confirm these features, you push whatever, and then you press OK, and then you get an updated rent of what you should be doing. So this is really rough, but because I built it very quickly in just a couple of minutes. That's how you would deploy a project from Altair RapidMiner on the desktop into a cloud-based solution you can use on your mobile phone, or build a very simple dashboard, or a very complex dashboard, if you wish. In this case, it's very simple. Sure. So we can get okay, so may I have I believe CP is the commercial partner for Altair in Indonesia. Yeah, we can follow up with that for sure. Okay, so I think Lynette can even put her email address in the chat, and she can be your first point of contact. Okay, so going back to the presentation now, so that was just a very brief demonstration of some of the capability in the RapidMiner tool. There's a lot more you can do with it. In terms of future work, in this specific case, for this specific project, and going into that other question around someone had asked previously around, what's happening? Around, hang on. So someone asked a previous question around what do we do with small data? Or how do we get additional data? This is sort of the answer to that question. Okay, so how do we, number one, what are some of the future work capabilities? So the first, I didn't really validate the models that I built. One reason is for most of so a regression model isn't well suited, especially the type of data that I had isn't well suited for a validation technique. It's typically used in classification models. So the best way to look at the results of a linear regression is to simply look at the data. If you add more data over time, that's good. But this is one reason why I didn't do it. There are other ways to do it, like maybe cross-validation or what the jackknife sampling and resampling is called, jackknife something. So there's other ways to do it, but the model isn't that great anyway. So actually it was okay. So when we removed Batam, it's quite a good model. But basically the way we want to validate this is probably the best way to do it is to use human input to say, take a look, understand this location. Is this right? What's missing? What's going on? And so this is one way to do that, is to take a look at the data, add different variables into the model. This is one way to improve the models. There's different ways of doing that. One way, especially given the domain that we're dealing with, is to simply have people who are experienced in the field say, when we charge as rent, we also take a look at this. Other ways to do it is to adjust the, so additional improvements I think you can make with the variables. I didn't adjust the rent for inflation. Inflation was big in Indonesia this year, I know. Previous years it wasn't. But the rent period that I gave you, that I had, was over the COVID period. So it's possible that COVID negatively influenced the rent period. And then so I would want to understand the effects of COVID, and I didn't feel comfortable doing that because I just didn't have the domain expertise of what happened in Indonesia during that period. One variable that I didn't use at all in the in your data is the geographic component to it, lats and longs. All I did was plot it on a map, but there's so much more you can do with it. You can use, there's different geo-mapping tools. Actually, RapidMiner has one as well. There's an extension that you can use that can plot distances between these points. But with lats and longs, you can use the Google Maps API to begin to calculate distances between things like parks, hospitals, like different features. I'm sure there's more things you can do with it. You can use those to begin to, someone asked, well, how do we get information from remote locations? You can use that to get satellite imagery to begin to understand what's around it and begin to build structural information that you can use in variables for that. Even things like driving distance from the nearest town, you can take a look at satellite imageries from, the lats and longs. How far is it from the center of town? How far is it from the nearest road? How is it far from this? You're beginning to think about that in the data because you're talking about the point to the nearest point of interest. I don't think that's probably that useful unless the people who are going to those locations are moving to that point of interest. I would reorient my variables to focus on that question. Where are people actually moving? Why would they be going? There are always, of course, additional data sources that you might be able to find. You will have more of a handle or awareness of what's available in Indonesia. I saw, a public government site on the data available for you. I didn't spend that much time going through it, but that you can. That's something you probably have access to. And then the other thing you can begin to do, I've seen in other countries, is trying to get, although it's always tough, is to start taking a look at actual sales numbers or trying to understand the performance of the individual stores. If I was the shop owner, I would lie to you. I wouldn't tell you the truth. But who knows, maybe you can do that. And then finally, the other way to do it is just to use the model. You don't need to implement the model and actually, start making decisions on it, but you can use the model to start thinking, is this working or is it not working? So you can still do the exact same thing you're doing in sending people out and adjusting values, but use the model and say, okay, well, how does it relate? Is it actually, it's part of the validation process. So yeah. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed that. And I certainly enjoyed working with the data and enjoyed the project. If you have any specific questions, but I don't have anything left on the actual presentation anymore. So thank you for your attention.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Sidan. Yeah. Okay. That was an insightful presentation, Dr. Sidan. It's now time to open the floor to your questions. Please feel free to type your question in the slide link, or you can ask directly right now in this session. So perhaps anyone who wants to ask, please don't be hesitant to raise your hand and asking right now. Is there anyone to raise hand to ask directly to Dr. Sidan? Ya, baik Bapak Ibu hadirin, apabila ada pertanyaan dipersilahkan.
Populasi aset di double itu
Mbak Cindy.
Iya, silakan. Oh ya, Pak Darmawan, silakan Bapak.
Yes. Thank you, Mbak Cindy. It was very comprehensive and technical, comprehensive, and very conceptual presentation. This was very good. I enjoyed the presentation. Thank you so much, Sidan. And this the very familiar analogy thing that we are easily understanding what it should be done and what it should be care about the data and the data analytics itself. We know that you have done some what I mean, like running our data, I mean the data from the GSM, and you say that it's quite good, but some notes from you. My question is this very straightforward question actually. With that data, then when we have an output of model from the data, can we say that it is enough to develop a models for valuation? And is it enough, or is it valid enough to I mean, like, to implement the model to the real world case like that? So because we know that the data is, you know, unstructured, maybe a bit sporadic or something. You know that. So
yes,
as Thomas mentioned in the chat, like, you know, it's maybe compared to Singapore is not comparable. Maybe I don't really understand what happened in Singapore, but maybe like that. So yeah, that's my question. Thank you, Sidan.
Yeah. So it's very dangerous to wait until everything's perfect and then to do the model. Every model that you build is wrong. No matter the data, no matter every model you build is wrong. No model is perfect by definition. And so this model showed with only a few variables and excluding Batam, 80% quality. That's what that R squared was. And so in other words, 80%, the way you can sort of view it is 80% of the time, we were able to explain 80% of the pattern within the data, which is about as good as you're going to get. We need to test that over time and still continue to validate it. But you've got to, you can deploy that right away. You can deploy that. You've got it. So yeah, you do. So I would deploy this model. You have the capability to deploy this model with supervision. Yeah. With human supervision. Yeah.
Yep. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's all. Can answer your question, Mr. Wawan, right? Okay. So perhaps we can move to the other participant who wants to answer to Dr. Sidan. Please just raise your hand before I move to the slide link. Ladies and gentlemen, if you want to ask, please don't be hesitant.
And I would probably say too that if people are interested in replicating the RapidMiner process, we can always have a follow-up discussion with that. I have the project, I have the data, we can get you the software, we can go through point by point on how to do that.
Yes,
so
of
I'm happy
course.
to do.
Yes, ladies and gentlemen, you can also sharing about your project using anything tool, perhaps also the RapidMiner, especially. Okay. Is there anyone to asking directly? Oh, okay. Actually, we have some question in the column chat, Dr. Sidan. Okay, this is from Mas Aldi. Hello, Mas Aldi. Do you want to ask directly?
So I think it's just around
Okay.
how big does your sample size need to be, right?
Yeah, it's about how many samples do we need to build some model? Is there any percentage from total population if the data? Yeah.
So there's actually a statistical test that allows you to determine that, called power analysis. To give you the exact answer, so the back of the napkin observation, the back of the number calculation is probably about 100 for a simple model. The practice of statistics was generated because the whole point of statistics for most of the time was to take a small fraction of the data and extrapolate it to the population. And so the early statistical pioneers, this was how they operated. And where you take maybe 10, 15, 20 observations and extend it to a much greater population. Now it's different with the large number of different machine learning algorithms like neural networks, where basically you want as much data as possible. So if you're about 100 observations, you can start building something reasonable. If you've got much more, then you can do very different things, but you need about 100, I would say. If you specifically want the answer, there's actually a statistical test that will tell you.
Yeah, okay, Dr. Sidan, perhaps probably in DGSM, when I try to data analytics a small data set that only use a simple regression tool like Eviews, SATA, and RStudio, that we can use only the limitation of the number of data is only 30, so we can still do the data analytics. But if using the big data analytics tool like RapidMiner, perhaps it's better to have a big data set, right? Because
no, RapidMiner has everything, so it's got.
Okay.
So if you
Okay.
yeah,
a small data set is okay, right? And perhaps I have some question also about what you already presentation before. First thing is about I don't know about the algorithm that you use for the case in this property prediction value of the canteen or the cafeteria. Is it only use a regression or a decision tree also? And I think I don't know if I maybe miss the slide that I can see the comparison between several algorithm method. Perhaps you can also explain about that. And then about the root mean square error that I have heard, if we can certainly believe that if our model is accurate or something like that through the square and the root mean square error value, that it's will be better if the RMSE is a low value, right? Yeah, RMSE, and also the normalized root mean square error that we have to make this element as our thing as our best to say this model is accuracy and adequate to build some real value. What's your opinion about it?
So, okay, so I did build many different algorithms and I basically ranked them. I did that automatically within RapidMiner. So I did compare about 5 decision trees, SVM. So I did choose it. And my emphasis was on, given the size of the data, it limited what I should be doing, not decision trees, but other things. And so given the assumptions of my model, I chose linear models. In terms of choosing the model selection, basically root mean squared, or you can do others absolute squared. These are basically comparing the difference between actual and residuals, so the smaller the number. But an R squared is also talking about the model explainability, but the best way to choose a model is probably using AIC or BIC scores, because they handle the cost complexity associated with degrees of freedom.
Okay, Dr. Chen. So that's about the NRMSA. And how about the algorithm method? I think I just see regression and decision tree, right? That you use in your model.
Yeah, so actually I had the system build a set of statistical tests for me here. It's very, very quick to do. Basically, what you do here is you can choose all of the variables. So you choose the system that you want to do. So I say I want to predict this variable, and then it shows you different ways of predicting. Do I want to cluster, or do I want to identify outliers? And it chooses automatically which variables for you are good to include or not to include. So all these red ones, it's excluded here for me, saying these are not good predictors. You can choose to override that. So I don't want address here, for example. I don't want, yeah, I'll include that one. No, I don't want that one. So you can choose what you want to exclude or what you want to exclude. I have my variables that I already built previously, so I won't necessarily go through that. And these are all the variables, all the models it's going to build automatically, but then it will choose different options. And so there's only 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 models here, but actually there's multiple permutations of those models. So there ends up being like 6 times probably 50 or 60 different permutations. And it goes through all of those models, builds them all, and then it ranks them in order of what's particularly good. And so, and then it tells you which one is the best. And so it ranks them on 4 or 5 different criteria. And so this is the easiest way to do it, actually. You just press it and it just runs it, and it goes through everything, and it produces the best model across all of them. So this was decision tree, this was this. And yeah. And so we can see this is the relative error. If we want to go ahead and immediately deploy this in a dashboard, we just press this button and we can deploy. So this is showing the decision tree actually has the best performance, and it's got the fastest time to production. This has got the fastest scoring time, and it's going to go through and it's going to rank the other trees as well. So. And so, and then and so this just takes another moment to complete, but yeah. So it takes a bit of time because it's building so many different models. So it looks like there's only 5, but there's not. There's many. And each time it builds one of these, it ranks all the data, all the variables in terms of what was predictive. So you can see here, I built something called a Z-score and other things. And so I was playing around with it. And then once you're good with it, you can then go ahead and say, okay, I want to change my accessibility to moderate and my environmental cleanliness to poor, and change this. And I want to update all of this. And this is going to be my new prediction. Change the area, change the point of interest, whatever. And it shows you what's contributing to high rents, what's contributing to low rents. So certain land shapes are bad, certain accessibilities are bad, so poor accessibility. But the greater the space, the greater the number of potential visitors, the better location, and the greater the later the year, the more expensive. Did that answer your question? Yeah.
Yeah. So in this case, we only use 3 variables, right? That as an important feature to this data analytics in this case, right? And
yeah.
You drop down the other variable because it's a contradictive with the feature importance.
That's right.
Okay. Okay, so then that's clear. It's so really a good tools, I think, for using the RapidMiner, because it's yeah, user friendly and and good visualization to modeling this data. Okay, so then perhaps we can continue to the other question, Dr. Sidan.
Great. Yeah.
Okay, we have a follow-up question from Mr. Helfit in the side link that who would like to know about how many independent variables are optimal for predicting rental values.
Very difficult. Yeah. That depends on the statistical test, but basically the biggest but the biggest concern you need to have is when you have categorical fields like areas or point of interest, and you're doing it in a linear regression, because it ends up doing something called dummy coding, and it ends up increasing for every category within that field. It becomes a new variable. So basically the general rule of thumb is the more continuous fields you have, the more fields that are numbers, the better. Numbers are better than categorical fields. So if you have the choice between using a continuous field or a category, always choose the continuous field. And remove all variables that are multicollinear or collinear. So you don't want one related to the other, unless there's a good reason for it. And the more rows you have, the better. But basically what you'd want to do is you'd want to just see if, and then you want to remove non-significant variables. So if you build a model and there's 10 fields, you want to start removing those variables that are not significant. In other words, the p-value is not equal to 0.005. It's less than, or it's greater than 0.005.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Sidan. So we depend on the p-value that about the variables. Okay,
yeah.
So in the meantime, please, ladies and gentlemen, continue to submit your questions, and I'll work through them in the other two they are received. If you have a follow-up question or would like to clarify anything, or maybe sharing about your project in data analytics, please don't hesitate to mention that as well here. Okay. Perhaps you already read some question in a column that's about the current condition market data market in Indonesia that is really different like in Singapore, because we have no a data system that really really good to explore and analytic like this like the rental price and market price in Indonesia. There's no fixed data in here. So perhaps you can also give a more clear tips and trick about to analytics this kind of data, that small data set that you already see in this case, the canteen case, with a lot of I think that's not good to analytics.
Okay, so basically the question is, in the absence of data, we need to make data to build our predictions. So how do you get data when we don't have data? And so you can begin to use and piggyback on platforms that have data. So maybe you want to do social media listening and begin to see if people are mentioning the locations, or you can begin to take a look at, I don't know if you have access to it, but for example, if you have access to telecommunication data sets from, looking at, because you can estimate concentrations of people based on the number of pings on cell phone towers, or you can begin to take a look at like one very common tactic is to build out an application that people would find useful and I don't know what that would be in your specific location, but in other words, you begin on a data collection process. So maybe you build an app that gives access to someone's information on the telephone. And then you can use this to start gathering information. Cindy, are you asking me a question, or I don't know if you're intentionally on mute, but so basically, if you don't have data, you can do two things. You can use external data sources that like are on Twitter or social media or some other aspect. You can get creative and build partnerships with other people, or you can start building simulated data sets and start doing these sorts of simulations.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Sidan. I would like to see the slide first. There are some questions. Yes, so this is a question from Mr. Chatur. In RapidMiner model, could we have the coefficient of the independent variables as we have on the regression equation?
Yeah, no problem.
Okay.
And so if you want to see that, that's all available within RapidMiner. So if we just go to the results here, this is the model equation down here. Where is the model equation? Sorry. So here's the intercepts, and you can actually frame this out a little bit better, but this is basically the model coefficients with the intercept. So y equals, this plus this plus this, or y equals, this is the intercept, and then the coefficients are all available here. There's another way to do it as well, but just what I have here is the easiest way, just to show it. So all the model coefficients here, and the standard coefficients are here as well. We can also get you, Lynette can follow up with a free trial if you want to get a free trial of RapidMiner. I think it's also available, and if you want to experiment with it yourself, that's something we can arrange. It's a really powerful tool, and basically it just lets you program without having to program, in that all these functions allow the same versatility as programming without knowing the core programming language yourself. But if you want to program, you can do it, or if you just want this information, you're able to do all of that very quickly. So if you want more information on a random forest and model explainability that was in the random forest, and taking a look at the weights and all that simulator and optimal parameters, it does it all for you automatically. And then if you want, you can then go ahead and convert all of this into its own standard process, and you can go ahead and you can run that, and it becomes available here for you automatically, and the results will appear. In addition, as Lynette had spoken about previously, there's also an academy here. So if you want to expand your capability as a data scientist, you can go into the academy here, and there's a whole learning pathway for you to become certified in machine learning or data engineering, platform administration, machine learning master, machine learning professional, data science master certifications. There's all sorts of certifications that you can do. And so there's videos and things you can follow through. Beyond that, we also have the community page here. So if you have any questions or advice, or seek advice on something, there's 1.1 million members here. It's like Stack Overflow. So if you say, hey, I want to know more about a linear regression, you can put that information in there. And then you'll see a whole bunch of questions around linear regression that you can then follow up with. Very often, RapidMiner itself are answering it, so we monitor this, and you get all sorts of help on the platform there as well.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Sidang, for your comprehensive response. So maybe, ladies and gentlemen, if you want to ask directly, please just raise your hand. Okay. Is there anyone to asking? Yeah.
That's fine with me.
You can also ask in bahasa, Bapak Ibu hadirin, you can also ask in bahasa Indonesia. Ya, Bapak Ibu bisa bertanya juga dalam bahasa Indonesia. Dipersilakan Bapak Ibu jika ada yang ingin menanyakan terkait data analitik atau mungkin beberapa hal yang pernah kita lakukan di penilaian ya. Salah satunya mungkin kita sudah melaksanakan pembuatan DKPS ATM, yaitu kita pakai views dengan sederhana, statistik regression yang sederhana. Nah, itu mungkin ada beberapa hal yang ditanyakan juga bisa banget ditanyakan sekarang Bapak Ibu. Yeah, hello.
That's great. Well,
thank you, Miss Lin, already shared the free trial of RapidMiner. Jadi Bapak Ibu bisa juga coba dan trial aplikasi RapidMiner nih yang sudah di-share oleh tim dari Altair.
great. And I'll put my email here too, in case anyone wants to contact me. There we go. So I think, and Lynette's email's in there, mine's email in there, and if you want a free trial of the software, it's also available for you there as well.
Still not Cindy.
Yeah, hello.
I can hear you now, Cindy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Great.
Thank you, Dr. Sidang.
Thank you, everyone.
Okay, perhaps there are one question, Dr. Sidang, that would be the last question. Perhaps, in your opinion, can you discuss perhaps any specific challenges while we working on predicting of values using this RapidMiner?
What are the challenges using RapidMiner?
Yeah.
I can only tell you about the challenges of our competitors. There's no challenge for using our product. It's frictionless. No, that's a good product. So yeah, no, I think it's a good product. So you can run on Mac, Windows. Challenges, it's a bit of a learning curve.
Yeah,
there's a small learning curve.
Perhaps like it will use a big data in our computer or something like that, and perhaps.
No, I mean the challenge is it's like anything. There's a bit of a learning curve. If you want to get really good at it, there's a bit of a learning curve. So I came from another software vendor actually, and so they acquired the company that I used to work with, and they bought my software, and then I saw this one, and I thought, oh, my software is better, and it's not as good as RapidMiner. But then I was forced to use RapidMiner, and actually, no, it's very flexible. So it's way more flexible than anything I was used, but I just had to learn how to do it. But yeah, so no, it's a good product. I like it.
Yes, okay, got it, Shiran. Perhaps from Mr. Kennedy from the Telcom property, do you want to ask directly? I see he asked so many questions in the column chat.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Miss Cindy. Thank you, Mr. Sidang. Thank you for the email from Lynette. I am also reply this email. Our company is one of the SOA, set of enterprise subsidiary of Telekomunikasi Indonesia or Telkom Group. We also handle several assets, probably about 12,000 assets throughout Indonesia. And we also use one of platform from GIS also, data analysis. It's called location. But the platform is maybe some kind of high SBU or high use base use from set, not the predicted the price or the pricing list from the asset. So maybe for another meeting, online meeting, we can discuss more further about this platform. Actually, I'm very interested from your platform. Maybe we can discuss more further in another time. Thank you.
Perfect. That sounds great. Look forward to it. Great.
Okay, thank you for sharing, Pak Kennedy, about your project in the telecom property.
Thank you, Cindy.
Yeah, thank you. So perhaps I will ask once again, perhaps there's some question for the last question, Dr. Sidan. So ladies and gentlemen, do you want to ask directly or ask the last question for today's event? Please just raise your hand if you want to ask. Okay, if there is no one to ask more, perhaps you can also sharing and asking to. Okay, there are someone raised hand here. Yeah, from Directorate of Evaluation. Hello.
Hello,
Okay.
Mbak Cindy.
Hello, Mas Bumi, please just asking to our speaker.
Okay, nice to meet you, Dr. Sidan. I just want to ask you about there is anyway to bridging the RapidMiner to another platform to the data grabbing, like some Android apps maybe, and there is any potentially to real time to projecting the RapidMiner's data to dashboard, so the stakeholder can view real time. That's a 2 point for me. Thank you.
Sure. So the first point was, does it connect to Android phones or like phones, mobile applications?
Yes, like that.
Yeah. So that's no problem. We have that as a deployment capability. It deploys directly to mobile phones through an API.
Like API code maybe?
Yeah, through an API call. Yeah. And we're the only vendor actually that has the ability to convert our dashboard displays real-time data down to the nanosecond if you want it to go that fast. It's used in stock trading applications. It's used in F1 racing, Internet of Things. It can actually, if you want, it can go so fast it can be nanosecond updates. So real-time displays of data will be no problem at all. And even if you want to change the model, like say you're using model A and then you want to immediately change the model, it will also immediately change the model.
Yeah. Just instantly can change.
Instantly, yeah.
Perfect, awesome, thank you.
No problem.
Thank you so much, Mas Gumi, for your questions. So, ladies and gentlemen, I think that's all the last question for today, Dr. Sidan. So, thank you for all the active participation in today's Q&A session. It has been engaging and insightful discussion, and actually, we greatly appreciate your thoughtful questions. And we have covered a wide range of topics, and our speaker, Dr. Sidan, has provided us with valuable insights and expertise. We hope you found this session informative and beneficial. And also, if you have any remaining questions, or if something comes to mind after this session, please feel free to reach out to us through the slide link or just email to Sidan and Ms. Lind. So Thank you so much, Dr. Sidan, for your insightful presentation. And ladies and gentlemen, finally, we come to the end of this group discussion. And before closing the discussion, I want to draw a conclusion from what the speaker said that before about the application of big data analytics is already promotes better and effective decision making and also efficient and effective governance. One of the application is in the field of valuation, for example, determining property price using data analytics. For some cases, somehow our desire to draw conclusions sometimes mislead us. That's why we need to data analytics. And from Dr. Sidan's demonstration before that, we know that in the case of our valuation data sets, the problem with small data set is a degree. It's a degree of freedom issue to build suitable and proper model. So different analyses need to be carried out. And Dr. Sidan gives insight on how to make sure we make correct predictions, having a sufficient sample, predictors need to make sense, revert to literature, repeat the experiments, plot the data, and be wary of outlier, of course. For future works, we can add more data sources like historical data and sales. One tool you can use to perform data analytics is using RapidMiner. So we can easily collect data from any sources, building model, and visualizing them seamlessly using data analytics. Tons of analytic tools and features and the AA platform. So that's all about the conclusion for today's event. And before we close, I'd like to extend our gratitude to Dr. Sidan and team for sharing their knowledge and expertise with us today. Your contribution have made this session truly valuable. And we look forward to seeing you in the future events and discussions. Until then, please stay connected with us and continue to the conversation with us. Thank you again for your participation and have a wonderful afternoon. I give it back to the MC, Mas Danang.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, give a big applause to our outstanding speaker and the moderator. Thank you, Dr. Sidan Murphy and Cindy Clara for the fruitful discussion. Hopefully, from the webinar, we get much knowledge and insight for all of us. The honorable, distinguished speaker, friends, and colleagues, that concludes our webinar session today. On behalf of all the committee and all colleagues behind the screen, we do apologize if there is any mistake during this session. I remind you again to fill the evaluation and the presence on the link tree to get the webinar certificate. The certificate will be sent to you by an email. We don't forget to say thank you to our outstanding speaker, officials, and all the participants for the attention and enthusiasm during the discussion this afternoon. We're looking forward to seeing you in the future event. Stay safe, stay healthy. I'm Dana Anggil signing off. See you in the next webinar Data Analytics series.
Thank you, Sidan, Ms. Lillian, and all of the participants.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Property. In reality, one approach to value that is generally used among appraisers is the sales comparison approach. The sales comparison approach is a process of indicating the value of subject property by comparing similar properties through their selling price. The selling price itself doesn't limit only to the selling price of the sold similar property, but it can include those of listed for sale or under contract. It then examines the similarities and differences elements of comparison that will be discussed in the further explanation. Before jumping into the core of the sales comparison approach, as a basis, there are principles of appraisals that are sticking to this particular approach, which are the supply and demand, substitution, balance, and externalities. Furthermore, the essential analysis that contributes to the sales comparison approach are the market analysis and highest and best use analysis, which can help appraisers in analyzing the competitive supply and demand factors that influence value in the market. So here are steps to apply in the sales comparison approach. First, research information of similar subject property. It is likely that 3-year sales history will be much appreciated. Second, verify the obtained transactional information. Verifying data will help eliminate the erroneous data that can have an injurious effect on adjustment amounts and ultimately the value indication. Third, select the most relevant units of comparison and conduct the comparative analysis. As a general basis, the unit of comparison used varies. It depends on the property type. The following are the common units of comparison used by appraisers. Next, adjust the price by examining the comparable units. We can use quantitative and qualitative techniques. Examples of the elements are physical, economic, legal, and non-realty components, which we will discuss in the following discussion. Remember that the elements and sequence of adjustments are not limited to the following illustration stated. The final step would be reconcile the value. In reconciling value indications in the sales comparison approach, the appraiser evaluates the number and magnitude of adjustments and the importance of the individual elements of comparison in the market to judge the relative weight of a particular comparable sale should have in the comparative analysis. So, getting to the core of our discussion, we are going back to the fourth step, which is adjusting the elements. In comparing those elements, appraisers can use comparative analysis. Basically, comparative analysis is a process by which a value indication is derived in the sales comparison approach. It may employ quantitative or qualitative techniques either separately or in combination. Quantitative techniques are available to quantify adjustments to the sale prices of comparable properties. The techniques are data analysis, statistical analysis, cost-related adjustments, and capitalization of income differences. This technique is often applied whenever sufficient information is available to support for making quantitative adjustments. Meanwhile, qualitative analysis appears when there are inefficiencies of real estate markets and the difficulty of expressing adjustments with mathematical model. Some qualitative techniques that are required in forming a conclusion are trend analysis, relative comparison analysis, and ranking analysis. Along the way, the basic elements of comparison considered in comparative analysis are the following. As you can see, the top 5 of the list are considered to be transactional adjustments, while the others are included in property adjustment. The main difference of these adjustments is, in transactional adjustment, we need to apply it in a specific sequence. On the other hand, property adjustments do not need to be applied in that manner. As for ourselves, we, Directorate General of State Asset Management, major in appraisal, are applying one of the comparison techniques, which is the statistical analysis, specifically the regression analysis. The reasons we are conducting this technique are: it's been used for mass appraisal by property tax appraisal, as it is the logical choice for tax assessment. And second, the regression modeling is more resource efficient than performing a conventional appraisal for each property in a large district. One of the real applications of regression analysis that we conduct is for indicating the rent value of the ATM or automatic teller machine. It is known that identifying the rent of ATM needs a mass property. And logically speaking, it wouldn't be good for appraiser to conduct the inspection of all the properties one by one each time, as it would be inefficient. By generating regression analysis, appraisers develop mass appraisal models to improve productivity. Note that by performing regression analysis, an adequate set of data is highly needed to reflect the market analysis to the utmost. By definition, regression analysis is a statistical technique in which a mathematical equation can be derived to quantify the relationship between a dependent outcome variable and one or more independent input variables. The sample itself, we determined that consists of 30 records of ATM by minimum, with the rent value as the dependent variable. Meanwhile, the independent variables are usually broadly derived from the four forces that affect value, which are social, economic, governmental, and environmental. Generally, the independent variables that we use are the following. Emphasize that the independent variables can vary and not limited to the following. After all these variables are analyzed using a statistical software, we then generate a regression model that is expected can be applied to identify potential rent value for the stakeholders in the future. This will be the end of the introduction of the sales comparison approach and our application of regression analysis. Bear in mind that in appraisal, widely range of knowledge is needed for appraisers to come up with the final value indication. So don't stop learning, for the world always keeps revolving, and be open for collaborating with other expertises. Thank you for your time and see you on another occasion.
Aman. Santai kita. Orang terkadang kamera. Kalau kebiasaan gaya kamera foto bingung. Aku nek kamerane terus nek kaca cilik nek kono. Kaca cilik ning pas kabutara pas berbung.